And welcome to RealAg Politics, everybody. Shaun Haney with you here from Real Agriculture and joined by my co-host tonight. It is Kelvin Heppner out of Altona, Manitoba. Hey, Kelvin, how are you?
Doing well I guess polls are starting to close on the eastern side of the country, so numbers starting to come in as election night is finally here, 36 days later.
It's a very short campaign, but in some ways, it kind of felt a little long. I don't know. It was a very
Yeah.
weird stretch. I don't know.
Yeah, well, and it's partly because I think we knew all summer that this was the likelihood that we were heading into an election, and so the election campaigning really started or was taking place all summer. We saw the Liberal government announcing money and announcing big plans, of course, conditional on being reelected. We saw that happening all summer. So, and I think just the high level of cynicism about this election and people not feeling that it's necessary and that sort of thing, I think just made it probably made it drag out a little bit longer too, or feel like it was a little bit less exciting than maybe some in the past, or a little bit less optimism about the outcomes here.
Yeah, very much agreed. And Jim Hale comments that very nice intro music. I would agree. Producer Jay outdid himself in this situation here for RealAg Politics. A lot of groove to that for sure. Canadian Cowman joining us on YouTube from the Milking Parlor. He says, "Good evening from the Milking Parlor on the West Coast. 3 hours till polls close." Kelvin, that's a good point. It sort of shows us how bloody big this country is.
Yeah, it's and that's the thing. We weren't sure when we should start this live stream today. Do we start it at 7 o'clock Eastern, 8 o'clock Eastern, or do we wait until we're getting to the point where we might have a winner announced? That could be real late. That could even be tomorrow before that happens. So, of course, yeah, polls open still for a while in on the western side of the country. Still open for another hour and a half here in Manitoba, as a matter of fact. So it's still early, and we won't be. I'm assuming we won't be knowing who the winner is before we're off the air here tonight.
Hmm.
But yeah, certainly talking about how big a country this is, that's certainly, I think, been evident again in this election in terms of the different races that are happening. We've seen the rise of the People's Party in parts of the country, and then in other parts of the country, people just don't understand how anybody is supporting the PPC. And so I think we're seeing a lot of that division and that disconnect between different parts of the country become quite clear, and it's been amplified through this election campaign.
Yeah, absolutely. So we know this that there's a number of different pollsters, and we know that pollsters have really been under attack. Going back a number of years for getting things wrong. But the pollsters really have this race close when it comes to a popular vote. Now we know this. Popular vote doesn't win you the election, and Andrew Scheer found that out just 2 short years ago. Does it give us? Do we take anything from the fact that really the Liberals and the Conservatives are really they're in a horse race across the country, even though it does come down to the seats?
Yeah, for popular vote, they are close, but for the Conservatives to win a minority government, they likely need to have a strong lead, much stronger lead in the popular vote than what the Liberals do. We just know that the Liberal Party is way more efficient with their votes when it comes to translating those votes into seats in the House of Commons. So yeah, I'm not sure we can read a whole lot into the popular vote. There's all kinds of questions around the polling and the uncertainty with COVID and the methodologies, how things are different this time around with this election. So the proof will be in the pudding, I guess, and we'll be ready to do all that analysis, or somebody's going to do all that analysis in the coming weeks after today.
Right. So in order to have a majority, and it seems a little, there is a path for the Liberals to get a majority, according to some political pundits, but a lot of people predicting more of a minority situation. In order to get the majority, though, 170 votes. What do you think? Do you see a path that may be possible for Mr. Trudeau that would kind of, I think, shock a lot of people, wouldn't it?
Yeah, and adding to that polling question is the motivation for voter turnout tonight. And a lot of people would say that Liberal voters are likely the least motivated to turn out today. So that's one factor to consider. There's also the Green Party has 85 ridings, I believe, this year where they don't even have a candidate. So where do those votes go that went to the Green Party in past elections? Is the Liberal Party the default number two option for those votes? I think that's something we have to we can pay attention to as the numbers come in tonight. There's also the impact of the PPC and are there any close? We know that the ridings where the Conservative Party has traditionally had very strong support, those are the ridings where the PPC is seeing the strongest support. So they may not necessarily take those ridings away, but are there going to be votes in close ridings where there's a Liberal candidate challenging the Conservative Party, and do some of those CPC votes go to the PPC, to get into the acronyms here?
Yeah.
That's something that we'll also be watching, of course, here. So, no, Lindsay, I'm not in a sauna. I figured the beige backdrop from the last RealAg Politics wasn't enough, so this is actually a fake backdrop that I made today. You can see the
You made
corners
it
of it
like
there.
in your shop. You sort of pinned
This
it together.
This is what you get when you have a dad who keeps things on the farm, and we have a woodshed, and I went into the woodshed and found some old pine boards and put it together. So
Yeah.
there's the story.
Hey, we got a comment here, and hey, everybody, appreciate you participating in tonight's program. If you're watching on Twitter, YouTube, Facebook, or at realagriculture.com/live, please send in your comments and questions, and we'll try to get to as many of it as possible. And remember, keep it civil. We got a comment here from Daryl watching on YouTube. He says, "I think the PPC clearly is trying a very obvious populist election strategy, but they don't have a Trump-like leader. But their strategy is cause for concern." Similar, in some ways, similar policies or thinking like President Trump, but I would agree with Daryl in the sense that Maxime doesn't necessarily grab people. He's not a showman like Trump was. Is that fair?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. He doesn't have the entertainment aspect to the WWE style that I think a lot of people would have said, or that President Trump had. But Maxime, he knows how to work a crowd too, and it's interesting because he's getting support in areas that if you had a politician from Quebec with a heavy French accent, he's getting support from crowds. You wouldn't expect that to be the case. So,
like in Calgary,
in Calgary, exactly. Here in southern Manitoba, he had strong turnout, like thousands of people, or at least 1,000 people, depending on estimates, 1,000 to 3,000 or 4,000 at some rallies here in southern Manitoba. So, I think that, he doesn't have all the same characteristics as Trump, but I think a lot of the people that are voting PPC or have put up PPC signs this year are people that would have supported Trump if they had an option to vote in the American election in the past.
Yeah. You had mentioned who Maxime's going after, which is the right side of Mr. O'Toole's base. Well, at the same time, Mr. O'Toole realizing that, I got to try to hold this base, but I also need to collect some of those red Tories back. And that's something that really that's no easy strategy to please everybody. Cut such a wide swath, which the Liberals have really cut a wide swath recently, and it's a little bit harder to do sometimes on the Conservative side of the equation.
Yeah, that is the challenge of conservative politics, and getting conservative politicians face that question: how you have to maintain the base, but you also need a certain number of votes from closer to the middle of the political spectrum. And can you win by only maintaining the base? The evidence would indicate likely not. But then at the same time, as soon as you go to the middle, as Erin O'Toole definitely has, and then you lose people on the right. So that's where we see that provincially all the time. We're seeing that in Alberta and other provinces. And now we're seeing it again potentially at the federal level. And it'll be interesting, depending on today's outcome, what the future holds for the Conservative Party of Canada, and whether Erin O'Toole remains leader.
Okay, stop there for a second. Okay, so I had David Coletto from Abacus Data, pollster, on the RealAg Radio last week. He'll also be on tomorrow's show as well to wrap up election night 2021. But Abacus is pretty in tune with what's going on at the Liberal Party because of the connection with Bruce Anderson, right? And one of the questions I asked David was, if the Liberals win a minority but get less seats, is that the beginning of the end for Trudeau? And he said, absolutely. All of a sudden it becomes a little bit more possible for those with ambition, like Chrystia Freeland, to all of a sudden be a little more public about their ambition. What is the scenario where this is the last election for O'Toole in your mind? Because Scheer got one shot. What would O'Toole have to do to deserve more than one? What do you think?
Oh, that's a good question. If the well, there's a good chance the Conservatives don't get the same popular vote that they got under Scheer. So I don't know what the internal party politics are. It certainly looks like the last week of the campaign, the Conservatives have lost a lot of momentum. And does that mean that there's some internal bickering? That could be. Last time around, we saw some key players in the Conservative Party come out right after the election and start to really call for Scheer's resignation and for the party to push him out. So I don't know. Like if the Liberals win a majority today, I think that's
a possibility.
O'Toole's done. What it would take in terms of if it's all status quo, I think if it's all status quo today, all the leaders except for Maxime Bernier likely feel like they lost or like it wasn't a win.
Yeah,
Trudeau. Well, although Trudeau, the expectations during the campaign, the Liberals slipped, so they have recovered somewhat. So maybe now coming out with the status quo will be a win versus where they were 3 weeks ago. But it's still, I don't know. What do you think, Shaun? What would it take for O'Toole to not run again?
I think you hit on it with the Liberal majority. If there's a majority, if there's a that would be a win for Trudeau, even with all the moaning and groaning and complaining and in many cases rightly so for calling this election when he did and for basically grand aspirational reasons. But you can't, in some ways I don't blame him because that's politics. Politics is like it is about power. I think if there's a Liberal majority, that is one where there's going to be a lot of people in the party wondering, what, do we give him another chance? Do we? Because if there's a Liberal majority, we're waiting the full term, right? So do you grant him all that time? But at the same time, if you're level-headed about it, and who in politics is level-headed? It's kind of rare. You're like, did he have enough time to win over Canadians? This was a snap election. It was not a part of the regular election cycle. I think there's a lot of justification to keep him on, no matter what. And the party just kind of went through this. Is there really
start over again?
Yeah, there wasn't a natural person to take over when Scheer was booted out. Now you get rid of O'Toole. I guess some people would say you're leaping to Pierre Poilievre next, but people have issues with that too. That is not he very good on the quips and he's witty and he's pretty good on Instagram stuff. But is he the right person? So I think with the lack of somebody in waiting, because the person in waiting is much more clear on the Liberal side. There is one for sure. Chrystia Freeland comes to mind, but there is others that have aspirations. I'm just not sure we have somebody with really, really grand aspirations on the Conservative side that people are going to be like, that's the person. Now we're talking. Now we are, like in Chrystia Freeland's case, most people know that at least it feels, it looks, it appears that she's been running the ship anyway. So, she did the NAFTA, then she was like, solve the West problem. I'm not sure she was too successful with that, much more successful with NAFTA. But she's, sort of taken it all on, and whether you agree with how she's done it or not, she definitely has shown the willingness to take on kind of anything thrown her way. Yeah. Brian makes a good point. We need a Rona Ambrose back for the CPC leadership.
That thought crossed my mind here as well as you were talking about potential replacements for O'Toole if it does go down that road. Rona Ambrose last time around was the interim leader, and so she was disqualified, wasn't allowed to run for leader. Now this would be a chance, I guess. Who knows? If things go badly today, there might be a campaign to get her back in. But yeah, we don't know if that's the case. We've spent a lot of time talking about this potential outcome, and I'm not sure that it will go this sideways for the Conservatives, but we'll have to see. In the coming hours, we'll find out.
Lots to watch. I don't think it'll take as long as the U.S. election did, but it may not be tonight.
No, well, and there are way more mail-in ballots that were sent out this election than the last election, and it sounds like Elections Canada is only going to count some of those tomorrow. or only going to announce those numbers tomorrow. And so some of the ridings, I believe it was, I think maybe 5 different ridings, there were more mail-in ballots sent out for this election than the margin of victory last election. So if that happens, there might be some ridings that aren't declared today because of how many mail-in ballots were sent out and still to be counted tomorrow.
Okay, what ridings are we watching really, really closely? It's interesting in a Canadian election. We don't get down to the ridings a lot, like say they would in a U.S. election. It's much more publicized as here are the battlegrounds and things like this. We don't have that as much in Canada, but there are some ridings that are quite interesting. One of the ones that I think, and actually Phil Shaw at Agrodome on Twitter had tweeted me a couple weeks ago saying that he thinks it's the most interesting riding in Canada, is the one that is Banff, I believe it's Banff Airdrie, which is the one where Derek Sloan is running. He was booted out of the Conservative caucus, and he's running there. That's one of the ones I know that you were following as well.
Yeah, Banff Airdrie is interesting. Blake Richards is the Conservative incumbent there. And this time around, though, those right-leaning voters in Banff Airdrie have all kinds of options. They have Derek Sloan, they have the Maverick Party, the People's Party, of course, the Conservative Party, and then the Liberal, NDP, Green running there as well. But it's kind of a 4 Conservative Party race, right side of the political spectrum race in Banff Airdrie. So I believe Richards is still the favorite there. But that's one of the Western ridings to watch this time around. We talked about the People's Party rise, and that brings up another, when it comes to the agricultural discussion in Canadian politics going forward, Beauce in Quebec is certainly important because that's Maxime Bernier's home riding, the one that he was the MP for from 2006 to 2019. A longtime MP there. He was defeated in 2019 by Richard Lehoux, a dairy farmer who ran under Scheer's Conservative Party banner and is running again this time around. So Bernier versus Lehoux in the riding of Beauce in Quebec is something to watch, because if Bernier does somehow get his seat back, you can count on the discussion around supply management certainly being part of the political part of the political conversation here over the next mandate.
Well, and remember this, that no matter how this works out in a minority situation, there's it can come down to where a Green Party with 1, 2, 3 seats, People's Party of Canada with 1 seat or 2 seats, where they can really hold power. It's sort of like maybe like a sort of independent senator in the U.S., like where a Mitt Romney holds a lot of power because the vote is so close, right? Or Steve Manchin is a really good example. Who's not your typical Democrat. So there's those kinds of things where we can really have that in this situation in Canada if it is a minority. And so that's where like a conservative minority can become hard if they can't lean on the Liberals or the NDP. So then all of a sudden the Bloc becomes like the Conservatives' best friend. The other one, the other riding that I know some people are watching, I had a listener call me earlier today about it, was what's going on in Chatham-Kent, Leamington, where Dave Epp for the Conservatives, who was the Conservative representative of the Ag Leaders debate that I moderated, he could be in a tight race, and part of that has to do with the impact of the People's Party in that area.
Yeah, it hasn't. Last election, it wasn't a super tight race. I believe I looked it up. He had 47% of the vote in the riding in 2019 to 31% for the Liberal candidate. But say the PPC cuts into Epp's portion of the vote in that riding, that's an example where the Liberal Party could come up the middle if the PPC and the Conservative Party split the vote. Nearby in Lambton, Kent, Middlesex, Leanne Rood, she had a similar share of the vote last time around in 2019. She, of course, has been the ag critic for O'Toole and the Conservatives. She, I believe, won 49% of the vote back in 2019. So I think it's still considered a safe seat for the Conservatives, but that's the thing with these People's Party votes. We talked about the similarities with Trump and how the pollsters underestimated the Trump vote back in 2016. is that same thing going to happen here in Canada this time around, where people haven't necessarily told the pollsters if they're voting People's Party? So that's something, another one of the things to watch here.
Yeah, I think you've hit on something there. Watch that very, very closely. It is very similar to what happened in 16 and pretty much repeated itself in 2020 last November. Daryl, watching on YouTube, brings up a good thing or a good point. That would be fun. Rona, it's supposed to be Rona versus Freeland. That'd be, I agree. That would be a pretty good battle. Brian, watching on Twitter, says there are an absolute ton of PPC signs in southwestern Ontario this year. Pretty surprising to me. That has definitely been. I was on RFD TV this morning talking about the Canadian election, and that was one of my list of not necessarily a surprise, but just things that we've really noticed that have changed since the beginning of this election just over a month ago. This is a party that went from 2-3% to, if you believe, I think one poll had them at 10 or 11, right? So that's definitely something to.
Well, and
to
it's
watch.
the same thing. I've heard that across rural ridings or somewhat rural ridings across the country. Here in southern Manitoba, too, our riding of Portage Lisgar went 70% conservative, or almost 70% conservative in 2019. And you go for a walk around our nearest town, and the sign ratio is like 10 purple signs to every one blue sign. So it's pretty obvious the People's Party has put a lot of their budget into signs, I would say. Maybe not so much the large media buys, more of their money put into signs. But
just like the NDP has spent money on TikTok and Instagram, right? They know who they're speaking to.
Exactly. Yeah.
What else do we have? Lawrence Macaulay. He's running again. That's something to watch.
The former Ag Minister is running again in Prince Edward Island. He celebrated he celebrated his 75th birthday a couple of weeks ago, and so he's been an MP in Cardigan since 1988. So, and I assume that's a safe seat for the Liberals in PEI. So Lawrence Macaulay, the longest running member of Parliament, and it looks like he'll be continuing. Another big one for the Liberals and for agricultural policy in the discussion here in Canada, of course, is the Minister of Agriculture's riding in the eastern townships in Quebec, in Compton, Stansted. Marie-Claude Bibeau has been the MP there since 2015. She won back in 2019 by only 5 or 6% of the votes, so just over 3,000 votes over the Bloc candidate. And we've heard, at least in the media over the last number of weeks since that English debate, that the Bloc have had momentum in Quebec. So I'm not sure how uncomfortable she is or where she's at in terms of watching the results today. But Minister Bibeau's seat isn't, I would say it's not a given that she wins her riding in the eastern townships in Quebec. And so that could have major implications when it comes to ag policy and how just the impact that, as we relate this back to the impact on agriculture and farms across the country, the impact this election could potentially have.
Yeah, absolutely.
I assume if she wins, she'll continue as ag minister, but that's also an assumption that we'll have to wait and see. What do you think?
If she wins and there's a Liberal government, I think I was in Ottawa 2 weeks ago, and I asked a lot of people that question, and I would say that that's the way most people are thinking. They would agree with that there will be a sense of comfort level is maybe the way to put it, that they feel that that's a good spot for her. I think some people jump to Cody Blois, who is from Nova Scotia, who is also winning his riding tonight with, I think, 20 of 228 polls reporting. So he has a decent lead. But he may have higher ambitions in the ag portfolio, is what one person told me, that he won't want to settle for that. I don't know. That was one person's opinion. So I would bet that she is back as ag minister. And the ag community will, I'm not sure how they will feel about that. But there's, we don't know who's all going to win the seats, but it's not like there is a lot of, people that grew up on a farm that a whole bunch of people, farmers and ranchers are going to identify with, that are just waiting in the wings. That doesn't exist.
No, and farm groups have certainly invested some time and resources into building relationships and getting her familiar on their priorities. So yeah, a change would disrupt that. But yeah, at the same time, yeah, Cody Blois would be an option. There's also Francis Drouin, who's on the Ag Committee and has, I think, has a fairly good relationship with most farm groups that go to Ottawa. Neil Ellis was the parliamentary secretary to Minister Bibeau, so I guess he would be another potential one to have on the Liberal potential Ag Minister list.
Do you think we see the Conservatives make any inroads in Quebec? We saw what happened with the Bloc and the English debate. It was sort of like, I don't care about the rest of Canada. Like, I'm just here, to talk about Quebec. Um, I could see how that would resonate. Like, if there was a Western Canadian party and somebody had said, I don't care about the rest of Canada, I'm here to represent Western Canada, people would be like, waving pom poms in some political categories. How do you think the Conservatives do in Quebec this year?
I can't confess to be an expert on Quebec politics at all, but I think they'll be happy if they have much the same, or even if they pick up a seat or two. I don't see a major increase. I think a win for the Conservatives would be seeing the Bloc get some of those seats back.
From the
That
Liberals?
From the Liberals,
Yeah,
exactly. And there are some. Quebec has, I believe, quite a few close three-way races, and so those are very hard to call. But the NDP likely isn't anywhere close to where it was going back a decade or so in
no.
Quebec. But yeah, I think the Conservatives would their path to a minority government means a strong bloc performance tonight.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. I agree with you wholeheartedly there. And also the other path for the Conservatives is in some of those ridings in, say, the GTA. The NDP winning some of those seats away from the Liberals as well. So it's just not about the Conservatives taking some of these seats. It's about some of these bad things happening in some of these Liberal races that they expect to win, where the Conservatives don't have much of a chance at all. I guess that's the parliamentary system. It makes it a little bit more interesting than just two parties. We got that.
Yeah, that's something that we're not used to here on the prairies, in rural areas. It's not even a race between two parties. I
It's not
can't
even
imagine it'd be entertaining to have a three-way race.
Okay, so what else we got here? Okay, so you asked me if the Liberals win the minority. What we got here? Share of vote. Liberals took 47% of the vote in PEI, which is typically a pretty liberal province. Okay, conservative ag minister. Who would come up there if you were to think about that? A little bit more to choose from. A little bit more to choose
Yeah,
from.
I'd say there's more options, way more options, but not a clear front runner. Leanne Rood has been the ag critic since O'Toole took the leadership of the party, so I think she would be the obvious top of the power ranking list there. Dave Epp, as you mentioned, but there is the chance there that we'll see what the People's Party does in those ridings, whether they hamstring the Conservative outcome there. John Barlow would be somebody on the list from Western Canada, from Alberta. He was the ag critic under Andrew Scheer's leadership, and he certainly knows the file well, has been on the ag committee for a while. Luc Berthold in Quebec would be another option. He's been the Conservative ag critic. One issue with both Barlow and Berthold is they endorse Peter MacKay in the leadership race. So they might still, I'm not sure how
Da da
quickly
da.
Aaron O'Toole and his inner his his decision makers around him will forget who endorsed who in that leadership race. So that was, we thought, one of the factors why Leanne Rood was named the ag critic, because Barlow and Berthold both endorsed MacKay in that leadership race. So
Politics is
those
petty. Are you are you trying to tell me politics is petty?
well, I
Really?
don't. It can be, yeah, yeah. Is it? For sure it is, but memories are also short in politics, as we can see by how this campaign has gone too, and promises that were made just months ago, obviously not all being held, being kept just a few months later.
I have never met Dave Epp until we did the Ag Leaders debate. I'll tell you, I was impressed. He was well versed in all of the issues. He was well spoken, and He was not just on his own issues. Like I would expect that, being in Leamington, he would know about the temporary foreign worker issue, could talk about that and importance of trade and things like that. He knew the Western drought situation. He could speak to it. If I didn't say he was from Leamington, he could be anywhere in the country. I was quite impressed by him at the debate. So is he the front runner? Not sure, but he would not be a poor pick.
Are there any other names that jump out at you, Shaun? Larry McGuire has led some farm groups in the past. I'm not sure he'd be interested in taking on a cabinet role.
Because how old is Larry? He's getting...
I don't know his age offhand, but he
Hey, Lawrence did it, and he was definitely older, so age isn't necessarily a thing. But okay, I'm going to take this indication. It's not Leanne Rude.
No?
I only say that because she wasn't the rep at the Ag Leaders debate. It's not the be-all, end-all, but I will take a little bit of indication from that maybe they're going to go a bit of a different direction. John Barlow would be fantastic. He's not too far from me here. He's from the Foothills riding. He spent a lot of time on Ag Committee, spent a lot of time on Ag, former journalist as well. He would be good, but like you said, he supported McKay, and that was a pretty... I made fun of the pettiness, but that was a fairly heated leadership race. That if you think about the leadership race under Scheer, and then you think about the O'Toole, this last one that O'Toole won, it was a lot more heated, and people
you think
were.
So?
I remember it that way.
Look at what we're seeing tonight with the People's Party, Shaun. That's a result of the Scheer race, and Scheer winning by just over 50% of the vote versus Bernier's 49% on that late ballot.
Yeah, but was it as ugly?
Maybe not during the race, but here we are however many years later, and there was an article out today, The Revenge of Maxime Bernier, or something along those lines. We're seeing that play out today, potentially.
And hey, to give him credit, people were laughing when he came out with the People's Party of Canada and the name. And I remember I was on holidays that week at the lake when he had that press conference, and there was a lot of snickering, and he may get a bit of a laugh tonight. Jamie O'Shea says, "Hey, what about a new MP? Should they win their seat?" So basically, back to this, if a new Conservative MP, that could very well happen, Jamie. That's a really, really good point. And let's be honest, the ag portfolio is not one of the top portfolios, so it can be a situation where a newcomer with strong ties to the farm community might be that just makes sense.
Yeah, and that's if it's a new MP, we may not know about them. They may not be on our radar at this point. So that's something we'll have to follow up on. Quick Dick for Ag Minister. There you go.
Question period would be good.
Oh yeah, he would be great at that. And his social, he'd be right up there with Pierre on his social. Pierre Poilievre on his and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh on the social skills, media skills. But
there you go.
I don't think his name's on a ballot unless that many people write it in.
Let's see here.
Rob Flack running in London. Lots of ag experience.
Yeah, there you go. I don't know him, Jamie, but you're right onto something there. That is very, very possible. I appreciate you providing that commentary. Daryl says People Party is make America great again, Canada style. I get where you're coming from, Daryl. I'm not sure it has gone. I'm not sure it has gone. They've even developed it that far yet. A lot of the gain in the vote has been based on COVID restrictions and mask mandates. The confusion lies in who has the jurisdiction over those things, and whether it's federal or provincial, I guess. That could be up for debate, whether a federal party could have influence in some of those things besides, things like air travel and things like that. But I'm not sure they've even got that far. Maybe less protectionist. That might be, in some ways, it's kind of the opposite of Trump in the fact that Trump is very protectionist. Bernier has always been a very sort of hands-off, sort of let the economy ride kind of. Think about his attitude on supply management and restrictions on trade barriers. Am I reading that right, Kelvin? Am I explaining that properly?
Yeah, well, there's lots of contradicting perspectives from Bernier. If you go back into his time as Conservative MP in Quebec, where there's even newspaper articles where he's quoted as standing up for supply management. Certainly, that prior to COVID restrictions, I think fighting against supply management was one of his main planks that people knew him for and that he ran on. But yeah, I think there's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of policy that the People's Party still needs to develop. Right now, they are running on the frustration with the COVID restrictions, and that certainly got them a lot of momentum. They're probably going to have the biggest increase in terms of the popular vote share versus the 2019 election of any party. So and at the same time, they may not have any seats coming out of this. So whether this can be sustained as hopefully COVID and all these restrictions end in the near sooner than later, whether the People's Party can sustain that momentum, especially if Bernier doesn't have a seat in the House of Commons. I think that's something that we can watch here. But yeah, Jamie O'Shea making the point here, Shaun. Rob Flack is the CEO of Master Feeds Canada. I didn't know he was running, but I just Googled his name here, and he's running for the Conservative Party in London West. So
there you go. Well, that is a good name, Jamie.
Yeah, he certainly could be added to that list of potential people involved in the ag file.
Okay, so right now we have, and we mentioned 170 seats to majority. There are 24 for the Liberals right now, 9 for the Conservatives, and 1 for the Bloc. Still 304 seats to be decided. So a long way to go, and I don't have the expectations in front of me, but it's mostly the maritime ridings reporting so far. Obviously, a little bit into Quebec. So nothing too terribly, wildly amazing here at this point. I don't have the comparison compared to last election on this one, but you know what we need? We need John King. CBC should rent John King for the week. Maybe just for the night.
And I thought RealAg should. Where's our map on the floor and all the maps? And
no, let's just dive down here and do this and do that, and this is a really let's go down to the street here and that map is incredible. And now a bunch of other networks, of course, have done the same sort of thing, but nobody does it like John King on CNN.
We're doing our best here, Shaun.
We're trying. We are trying. Hey, really good question. Yeah. Well, and I'm not in the regular studio because I'm actually in our what I call kind of the bullpen, where a number of us sit during the day, and I have 3 TVs in here, so I can sort of watch what is on the different cryons. So that's why I'm not in the regular room here. So. Jim, and if you want to be like Jim, I suggest you be like Jim. Jim's a great guy. You can ask your question, provide your comment on anything we discussed or things you want to bring up here. Jim has a good one. He's watching on Facebook. Does the performance of Mr. Singh say something about maybe not turfing your leader after a seemingly poor performance in their first election? What do you say to that, Kelvin?
I think it depends on how Singh does tonight. I don't know if there's any guarantees that he does well. And he's certainly got the highest leader rating in terms of popularity and likability, but I'm not sure how. It'll depend on how he does tonight, and I think that could be a potential. That's another outcome. All of these leaders are a little bit uncomfortable going into the results and tallying tonight, because if the NDP don't have a good night, does he stay on as leader? Do they move on? I'm not sure. He certainly is the king of TikTok politics, but I'm not sure that that doesn't necessarily translate into seats in the House of Commons and movement on the NDP agenda. There is also, you talked before about different parties potentially tipping the vote when in a minority government in Ottawa. And one notable difference this campaign versus 2019 and what we were seeing prior to this election, Singh and the NDP were working with the Liberals, and in 2019, Singh would not work with Scheer and the Conservatives. This time around, he hasn't ruled out working with the Conservatives, so that could potentially, well, the fact that he's saying that probably, I don't know if that's a statement on how O'Toole has moved the Conservative position more to the center, that it's possible that the NDP work together with them. But that's something to also pay attention to. If we would see a Conservative minority coming out of tonight, the NDP are potentially an option for backing some of the policy too, apparently.
So that sounds good. Is it
I know, yeah.
like it
Whether it actually happens,
like I
it'd
see
have to
the
be on specific issues that
yeah.
where and that's what we saw apparently in, was it the Nova Scotia provincial election, where the Conservatives actually went further to the left than the Liberals on healthcare and housing, I believe, were the two main issues there. So we'll have to see whether O'Toole does that here, if he should become the Prime Minister after tonight.
Brian has a question. He would like to talk about how the heck has your internet not dropped? Well, there's a secret to that one.
Yes. And that is competition, and competition from a U.S. company, actually. So hopefully we get fiber here someday on the farm. But right now, thanks to Elon Musk and Starlink, it seems like it's working okay tonight.
So has it lived up to the hype?
It's not perfect, and I'm curious how it's going to perform in snowstorms in winter when we have snow on the dish. It's very similar to satellite TV, where if it's raining hard outside, no internet, and so far it's working all right. The speeds haven't. They're not like the first time you hook up to Starlink. I'm pretty sure they have it programmed that the algorithm, or there's something programmed there that you get astronomical speeds the first time you hook up, but after that it kind of has leveled out, and it be very similar to, well, maybe even a little bit slower than what we would get if we had fiber in the country. But like we know, much of Western Canada, or much of rural Canada, fiber is a long way from being an option, an affordable option.
It's better than what you had.
Oh, it's way better than what we had.
Yeah,
yes.
Okay, like it's just a little worse than fiber. Like before, you could barely, you would have a hard time doing this at all.
Yeah, you're right, for sure. Yeah,
Yeah.
It would be a still photo, or I'd be frozen with staring into weird spots on the screen, something like that. But Derek with a comment, what's this rain you speak of? Yeah, that's true too. We haven't had much rain to test how this internet performs this summer. You're right.
Yeah,
maybe a little more than out further west though. So
somebody this election that we're saying goodbye to is Wayne Easter. He's hanging it up and going to go into retirement. And is there any other notables you can think of? When I thought about goodbyes, he would be one that kind of came to mind right off the hop. But I couldn't really think of any other ones of real note for an agriculture audience.
Yeah, I can't off the top of my head either. I haven't thought about this much, but yeah, Wayne Easter is certainly a longtime MP involved in agriculture. He would be the most notable. I guess we'll see after tonight if some of the other ones, maybe some of the names that we've already talked about, whether they are reelected after tonight. So part of it is, this is only, so in 2019, when these politicians ran, most of them were thinking this is a 4-year commitment and planning their lives around this being 4 years. Here we are, 2021. So I think a lot of them probably are just, it was already factored into that decision in 2019 that they would still be running or working as an MP at this point. So there is the interesting implication for this election, though, too, the timing of it. If you go back, is it 2000? So October, I believe it was October 19th, 2015. That's a key date for a lot of these MPs. That's when the Liberals took power, and you need 6 years in service as an MP to max out your pension. And so the fact that Trudeau called this election a month before October 19th means that all those first-time MPs in 2015 need to win tonight to max out their pension. And getting back to pettiness and the less wholesome aspects of politics, that is certainly a factor in some of these decisions too, in terms of people running again in this election, I'm sure.
Now, Jim brings up another really good question. Is one of those 3 TVs on the Rays Jays game? And I can honestly tell you tonight, Jim, no. You asked, I think, Jim, you were a part of one of the RealAg Lives. Was you, me, and Kara. And Kara called me out on it, and I was watching the Jays game. But right now, I am not. So,
what's the score, Jim?
Yeah, let us know what the score is. I did have it on the Golf Channel earlier. I am so stoked about the Ryder Cup this weekend, but that's a whole nother story. Okay, so let's talk about the differences between the parties on the ag files. There is some similarities. Not a lot of this got focused on. We tried to bring it out during the ag leaders debate. When it comes to the Liberal campaign, what are some of the pieces of agriculture that we kind of need to keep our head on a swivel on?
So, of course, the focus on climate. I think if the Liberals are reelected, we have much more of the same, and they already have announced a lot of the programs and goals and targets for the next 5-10 years when it comes to agricultural policies. So, I think if the Liberals win, more focus on climate. Carbon tax continues its climb to $170 per ton in 2030. They are going to continue with these programs, paying farmers for reducing carbon emissions, which I don't quite understand why we're going that route instead of the carbon offset market type system where the market and private industry would essentially pay for farmers reducing carbon emissions, carbon credits. At this point, it seems like the Liberals have chosen to go with direct payments, which in the long run seems less sustainable if you want to actually go that way. There's also the fertilizer emission reduction target that we talked about back on our post-debate show, that 30% reduction in nitrogen fertilizer emissions by 2030. How do we get to that? And is that going to be enforced? How is it going to be enforced? Those are all big questions if the Liberals win again tonight.
Well,
I don't know. What else would you have to add? That's all environment related. There's, of course, many other files as well, but I think that'd be one where there'd be some difference between the Liberal and Conservative outcomes here.
I can tell you this. I don't know what else to tell you, but I can tell you this. We have an official result that Lawrence McCauley has won his seat in Cardigan in PEI. So Lawrence is back in the fold. Maybe, hey, if Bibeau loses, maybe Lawrence is the ag minister.
We didn't have him on that list. He could slide right back in there. 1988 to basically, there are probably some people watching this that were born after. I know there's people watching this that were born after Lawrence was sent to Ottawa by the people of Cardigan. So.
He is the Chuck Grassley of PEI.
Not quite that old yet.
Chuck's like, is Grassley's like, is he 90 now? He's pretty close.
He could be, yeah.
He's pretty close.
Yeah.
Still going strong. Well, when I think with the Liberals and ag policy, all eyes are on the environmental file. I think it's really hard to get. There's other things, but I think the one that has the most impact on farmers likely is that. And what does it look like? How far do they go? You know, what happens? We have the UN Food System Summit that's ongoing. What comes at, like, you know, who I just think when you think about power inside that cabinet, Jonathan Wilkinson and the Minister of Environment and Climate Change, he has a lot of the cards. And so I just think it's hard to look past that in terms of when we think about impact on the industry of agriculture. You know, trade, with it being less of a focus for the Biden administration, I think the heat is kind of off. Like, trade was like we talked about trade. It felt like every day on RealAg Radio. It was just right there, right? What was going to happen with the NAFTA and the new USMCA? And I remember you and I were in Germany, Agritechnica, when Canada did the CPTPP, and Trudeau missed that meeting. Like, there was a lot of drama with trade. It kind of feels like some of that is just sort of like it's really softened. And so,
who's the trade minister right now, Shaun?
Right now,
I know you know, but. Well, okay, sorry. Well, technically she would still be right now, but yeah. But I just mean, right now, I would say most people wouldn't even be able to name.
Yeah.
Well, we talked about this on the radio show on Friday that most people can't even name the ag minister. But right now, the trade minister profile is super low, or as low as I can remember it being since I've been involved in covering this.
Which is why I agree wholeheartedly with CAFTA and us needing essentially a trade enforcement officer. Somebody to match the technical skills and wits on some of the technical details of trade with the likes of Europe, who has a trade enforcement officer. USTR Catherine Tai, she's a lifelong combatant in the ring of trade. So I really think that's something Canada needs to look at right now. There's a lot. You talk to farm groups, and maybe not on the record, but a little bit behind the scenes. we're trade promoters. We're not necessarily we're
Not
lacking on.
enforcers for
We're not
sure.
enforcers for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, so that would be a bit of the difference there when you look at it. What in the conservative platform for agriculture grabs your attention?
Oh, I don't have the platform right in front of me, but I think that we would see less of a focus on carbon. There would be more exemptions potentially there, although it's unclear how Aaron O'Toole's carbon plan would apply to farms. At this point, I think some of the farm groups, including grain growers and CFA, are looking for some clarification there on whether farmers would be exempt from this credit system where every time you buy fuel, you would accumulate some points for buying things that reduce your emissions. That whole policy, I'm not sure whether Aaron O'Toole actually went as far as thinking that he would have to implement that when he announced it back in spring, because that's something we'll have to watch whether that
Isn't
actually
that
works.
ironic?
But well, it's certainly. I think the idea was that it got him off of having to defend the carbon or the climate stance that the Conservative Party has had in the past
Yeah.
on a daily basis. But there would be more of a focus on trade under a Conservative government for sure. We saw that under the Harper government, more of a focus on signing trade deals and negotiations and things like that. So I think that we could expect that. Both parties say they would continue with the Canada Grain Act review process or resume that. The grocery code is something that I know you talked about in the debate, and they both say they want to move ahead with this grocery code of conduct, but the Liberals, I believe, Bibeau said that it wouldn't be mandatory under their government, so that'd be one difference, I guess. I don't know. What do you think certainly the Conservatives have more of a connection with agriculture among their MPs, among their ranks, but at the same time, we've seen in the past that sometimes agriculture gets taken for granted then, and the vote gets taken for granted. So I'm curious how that would all play out, especially and Aaron O'Toole, if you've heard interviews with him on agriculture, he is he's quite well versed on agricultural policy and the issues of the day, which I'm not sure you could say about the other party leaders. So I think that's something that farm groups would appreciate.
Well, we know, like, I don't think agriculture has, like, at the end of Harper, when Ritz was the ag minister, there were some big asks, like, we will obviously the single desk, we want marketing choice. I don't think there's a big agricultural ask right now. And so maybe what a conservative government leads to is just sort of leaving ag to sort of do its thing.
Wow. And that's something that I think most farmers would be happy with after some of what we've seen over since 2016 when it comes to fertilizer and now glyphosate and some of these other things, tools potentially being taken away.
Maybe, there's more of a, well, hey, you know what? When you think about it, I'll use some of the liberal language. Cody Blois, in the liberal policy, this economic agriculture being this economic superpower. A part of that for some people when they hear that is really unleashing agriculture and is removing barriers to success. And everybody has a different version of what that sort of looks like. But I would. You think about his carbon plan. I would imagine, although there is lack of clarity at this point, but agriculture would be able to work its way towards probably being omitted from some of that, especially in the case of grain dryers or other situations where there is no ability to do it another way. So I think that's
and the Conservatives were trying to do that as recently as June with Philip Lawrence's private members bill. So
yeah. Let's see here. Derek asked, do you think that urban population looks at carbon price targets with more critical eye? Is that under the Conservative government? Maybe Derek's asking that question. I think he's going to have some implementation issues. The biggest criticism I think a lot of urban people have about O'Toole's plan is it was a little bit complicated in terms of how they were going to. There was a card. Isn't that how it was going to do? You're going to collect points and it was like almost like the Aeroplan of carbon like management.
Yeah, exactly.
There was criticism
Well,
of how they would actually do that.
well, and in some ways you can politically argue that you're incentivizing spending on things that emit carbon because you're rewarding them with these points. So I think
Yeah.
that's a political argument that the urban population, O'Toole will have to convince them that's not the case. And then you also have the issue of having this card and having it know what you're spent, having somebody in government potentially know what you're spending money on. That's
Huh.
that's something that hasn't even, I think, been discussed a whole lot. But that, yeah,
That's going to
in
come up.
yeah, it'll come up if O'Toole has to actually implement this.
Yeah, that's going to
It's
come up.
tracking what you're, yeah. So
Lindsay did some research, and Chuck Grassley is 88 years old, and he first assumed office in 1981. That is amazing. That's loving what
older
you
than,
do.
yeah, yeah.
He's a farmer at heart. Like that. That's wow. And still holds like big roles. That's the part. Like, that's not just being put out to pasture and like biding your time. Like that. He's in big roles. Like so. That is super amazing. We have currently here the Liberals with 24 seats, the Conservatives with 9, the Bloc with 1, 304 still to be decided. Seamus Reagan has won his seat as well, Kelvin, quite handily, I might add. So there are some well-known people that are being announced here. So interesting. Well, we'll have to see if any of the big names fall. We mentioned Bibeau earlier. Is in a tight race, and there are several others that it can be especially when you're doing things on, I don't know, the world stage, but the national stage, and you have some name recognition. It can be a really tough fight, a humbling fight to go back to your riding and have to battle it out when you think you've done a lot of good things. So it's got to be a bit of a, I don't know if I use the Jerry Maguire line, a pride swallowing siege, but it would be difficult. It's some of those riding battles can be get personal and dirty and very, very contentious.
And I believe in Bibeau's riding, the Bloc candidate, I was reading an article where she was quoted, and she even used the line, something, I'm paraphrasing her, but she said something along the lines of, Madame Bibeau has to fight for farmers across Canada. I fight for farmers in our riding, was the line that she used. So
jeez.
there is that that play on it. Of course, in Quebec, that will often be the Bloc message. But Derek makes another good point here, Shaun, if you can pull up his comment. Whichever government wins, urban neighbors commenting on food costs is way up. I think that's something we're just starting to see when it comes to food costs and food prices, and how, whether it's actually related to commodity prices at the farm level or supply chain issues and logistics and all of that. I thought maybe this would be the way that agriculture and farming policy would make its way into the election conversation. It doesn't seem to have, but I think it's going to be part of the national discussion, along with inflation and some of these other things in the coming months.
Do you think it was portrayed poorly in that conversation? Like, are we gonna have to explain how food costs are going up, but it doesn't mean that in some cases the hog farmer is more profitable. Like, right? Or do you think that people just look at it and say that, hey, look at how much money these farmers are making?
Yeah, I don't know. I think a lot of people, like Derek's already alluding to, I think we're already getting questions as farmers. Why is meat so much in the store now? Or I've noticed it's climbed since the last time I went shopping, or the last time I had to buy this for Thanksgiving. Last year turkey was this, and this year turkey is what, like that sort of thing. I guess that might not be a great example. Turkey was short last year, but I think that conversation is already happening, and I don't think it negatively reflects on farmers, but I think it does drive people to once again think about where their food comes from and how it gets to the store where they buy it or the restaurant where they buy it. So that's not a negative thing for farmers and driving farm policy discussion.
Yeah. Are you surprised by how little impact it seems the Jody Wilson-Raybould book has had on this last week of the election?
Well, we had a question here from Daryl, if either of us have read or seen it.
Here it is, right there.
Yeah. And I actually downloaded the audiobook on the weekend and listened to most of it. I'm not quite done, but I think I'm not surprised because people already had their minds made up on what happened with Jody Wilson-Raybould, and I think the judgment was already in. So when her book came out, I'm not sure it changed. It came out last week and sheds a quite negative light on Trudeau and especially on the Prime Minister's office, the people close to him, Jerry Butts and Katie Telford, and the control that the PMO has over ministers and that sort of thing. Of course, going to the SNC Lavalin affair is the center of that scandal. So it paints the Liberals and their leadership or their current leadership of the party in quite negative light. But I think that everybody who is opposed to the Liberals winning and already thought that, and people that are fans of Trudeau, I think they've already found their reason for discrediting Jody Wilson-Raybould's side of the story. So I'm not 100% sure, or I'm not that surprised that it didn't have an impact. There are all kinds of interesting notes in the book, though, about the life of a minister under this government. One thing of note, you talked about the influence of Minister Wilkinson, the environment minister, on ag policy in the past and potentially going forward. I learned from the book that the Trudeau PMO does not approve of ministers talking to each other one-on-one. The chiefs of staff are supposed to be present, and the chiefs of staff are appointed or recommended, approved by the Prime Minister's office. So essentially, the PMO wants to have a say and influence into every conversation, even between ministers. There's that much PMO centralized control under this government. So, or at least according to Wilson-Raybould's account of her time as the Attorney General and Minister of Justice, and then later, I believe she was Veteran Affairs Minister for a very short time before she left cabinet. But yeah, I don't know. Did you think it would have more of an impact? Certainly,
No.
the timing of the release. I think she moved it up because of the election.
She did.
Yeah, or the publisher did.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it'll have driven sales, I'm sure.
I'm not surprised. And two things come to mind. One is usually these tell-all books are the expectations way too high. They're not as exposing as people think, and they're
Robert Fife has already got to the bottom of it.
Yeah, I'm not sure how much more there is to tell. Bob Fife at the Globe and Mail has done a fantastic job on it. The Globe and Mail broke that story. The other thing is let's learn from other political examples. There has been how many tell-all books written about President Trump, during the time that he was in office, and it didn't move the needle at all. Because the reality is, you addressed it. People's minds are already made up. It's just the way, that's the environment that we're currently living in. The sides are chosen, and if you think that Trudeau is a huckster, you're like, go Jody. And if you're a strong supporter, you believe that the Prime Minister did what he had to do for the country. And that seems to be the time that we're currently living in. So I'm not surprised. But I am going to read the book. No question about it. Especially when you said there was some interesting nuggets in there about some of the political process.
Well, and it's not the books that we read, at least in Canadian politics, aren't always about the current government. Well, we'll see after today. The book might be stale after today, but as of yesterday, they're still in power, and so it certainly sheds a lot of light on how cabinet functions and how Trudeau works with his ministers, and well, not just Trudeau, but that PMO having lots of control, which is something the Liberals always criticize Harper and the Conservatives about. Here we are with centralized control again.
And before everybody says, that this is Jeff Nielsen's watching and he's having a hard time texting because he's combining at the same time. Be careful, Jeff. You can't do too many things at once. This centralized control is becoming more of a thing. We see it federally with the Liberals. We know the Liberals criticize the Harper government for it, as you just mentioned. We have issues in Alberta with accusations of very centralized control in Kenney's government. I know Brian Pallister had some of the same criticisms his way in Manitoba. So this is not just a liberal left thing. This is something that seems to be becoming more of the way to operate when it comes to Canadian politics right now. And I'm going to say, unfortunately, I I think, to not allow ministers to talk to each other seems. I would have a hard time working in that environment. I just think you'd be constantly. People think you're spying, like you're constantly being spied on. That trust is a thing, and that
Yes.
that who is the you remember his name? I did the interview. He did
Headley, Douglas Headley.
Douglas Headley. He did a report for Cappy, and he talked about how that's one of the biggest issues right now in Canadian politics is trust. Um, it's
Yeah.
it's 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 really become a problem.
And it's taken us over an hour to get to this, but to me, that's the issue of this whole election and the whole situation we find our society in right now is trust and knowing who to trust, whether it has to do with the science of COVID and treatments for COVID, or government, and who we believe when it comes to leaders and what they're promising as part of this campaign. Trust. Douglas Headley, I believe he was deputy minister, or one of the top people in the federal ag department for many years. And so now that he's retired, Cappy hired him to work on that report. But he said something in there about how he was talking about the context of federal provincial ag minister relations, and how when you don't have trust, things get expensive. You have to use large amounts of money to make up for trust. You have to buy support. And I thought, man, that statement that applies everywhere. If when you don't have trust, then you lose ways of influencing other people around you, and I think that's where we get into bad politics, where people are in it for money or for corrupt reasons.
So here's some big picture questions. How do you fix that? Because I would say that if Trudeau is reelected tonight and is Prime Minister Trudeau again, under even a minority situation, his ability to build back trust with, I'll just say it, with Western Canada, there wasn't a lot of trust going into it. That goes back to his father. So we've already had numerous years with Prime Minister Trudeau. So he has challenges on the trust front, and we see what happened with Jody Wilson-Raybould, and we see that. I am not going to tell you today that I believe that Mr. O'Toole, if elected Prime Minister tonight, is all of a sudden going to be able to gain the trust of the people on the left. We saw how all you got to do is spend 10 minutes on social media and see how cemented some of this stuff is, and it's just. So we don't really have we don't have somebody in this election, and I don't know what that person looks like or what their characteristics are, but we just really don't have that person running in this election where I'm going to bring the country together. I'm going to build back trust. Even I'm not even sure people would allow it. That's the other part. We put all the fault on the leader, but the people got to want to participate in that, and I just don't get that impression whatsoever at this point.
Yeah, that's, I think, the question of these times right now. There's so much division, especially in rural areas when it comes to COVID policies, and how are we ever going to move on politically, just as society? I think that is a huge question. And right now, my internet is freezing on my computer, so Brian may have jinxed it before, but yeah, I think. I think that's the question. How do we move on from this? So that's maybe one of my biggest personal issues with this election campaign is we had enough issues going on. Now we have this election campaign that has, I would say, further divided Canadians when it comes to different views on, with Trudeau using vaccinations as one of his main records, or one of his main or one of the main parts of his platform, pushing the vaccination issue. That hasn't helped with the division and polarization of Canadian society, and I'm not sure that that has fully been realized by people in Ottawa. And so, yeah, how do we move on after this election? That's something that it will depend somewhat on the result tonight or tomorrow, whenever Elections Canada makes that determination. But yeah, whoever wins is not going to have an easy time in the coming weeks and months here.
Okay, so let's jump ahead here. The next Canadian election,
Do we have
What's
to?
different? Do you is
No.
okay in the next Canadian election? Is the Liberal leader Justin Trudeau?
No,
Okay.
I don't think so. I think he's used up his brand. He'll. I think he's already personally ready to move on too. But yeah, he'll go out on his. He'll try to go out on his own terms.
Do you see a combination of the Conservative Party and the People's Party?
Hmm. No, that's a long. Well, I never say never, but I think that's a long way from happening. I think at this point, Bernier will have to, once COVID restrictions lift, assuming that happens again sooner than later, uh, I think Bernier will find himself looking for purpose and looking for how he attracts people to the party, and so he'll have to be quick to find something that his followers at right now support him for. So I'm not. The People's Party right now is riding this wave of frustration with the COVID restrictions, but I'm not sure where that goes after the restrictions are lifted. So I don't know. Well, that in some ways then we would be going full cycle Reform Alliance, a Reform PC,
Yeah.
Canadian Alliance, and that's what conservative parties I think traditionally do in Canada. So I guess that could happen again, but at this point, well, and Bernier has, I believe he said now that he'd be up for a leadership review after this election. So he, I am not sure that there's any clear contenders there to challenge him on that. So it's easy for him to say, but yeah, the People's Party, I think, has a long way to go again in terms of defining its policy and what it stands for.
Yep, that's a good point. I just saw Cody Blois of Nova Scotia has not been, they've not called it yet, but it looks like it's on its way. So there's an ag name that people will be familiar with. Yeah, so we got 26 Liberal, 8 Conservative. So a long ways to go, Kelvin. So with that long ways to go, I'll ask you, what's your prediction for tonight? What's your prediction? What do you think is going to happen?
I'm not sure. I haven't, obviously, the last hour and a half here, we've been talking and not listening to what others are saying, but I think the most likely outcome, according to the polls, again, however much faith you want to put into it, is a Liberal minority. I'm not sure that I'm going to predict that, but I think that's the most likely outcome is a Liberal minority, and Trudeau, I think if he is too excited about it, is certainly going to. That's not going to go over well with Canadians if he's excited about a minority where it's status quo or even less seats than what they had going into this. But
because a lot of people are like, that's the thing about the win, how like branding and public, the public relations spin. It's really hard to be excited about having the same result after spending all this money on an election. I'm really interested in and I've told a few people this, and they're like, you need like a hobby, but I'm super interested in what got us to this election call. Was it people around him telling him go for it, do it, and he was hesitant, right? And he got convinced, or was it his own ego that said, we got to do this? I want to do it. I want Canadians to I want them to speak and tell me, and, as we move forward with whatever that is, and people around him like, don't do it. Like, I really would like to know who, what happened here, because the same result is really, it looks very, very poor on them. Especially at this time. You can say it. Hey, it's during the pandemic. Very, very poor timing. There's other things to focus on. There's the money. It'd be one thing if this was they had maxed out their time and we had to have an election. But this was a snap. And I remember, and I don't have the numbers that happened in the UK in front of me, but I said that I remember you and I and Lindsay were talking on RealAg Radio on the Friday show, and I had mentioned what happened in the UK where, jeepers, I'm drawing a blank.
Theresa May.
Theresa May,
thank
Theresa
you.
May? Yeah, Theresa May. She called a snap. She wanted a majority. so that she could do what she wanted in the Brexit negotiations with the EU, and she performed terribly poorly. And that's sort of the same thing that is potentially going to happen here tonight if they end up with around the
Yeah.
same seats.
And I think 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, it really looked like that was the track we were headed on. But the Conservatives floundered the last 2 weeks, and so yeah,
How much do you put on Kenny for that, though?
oh well, in Alberta, the results will have had an impact on Alberta results as well as everywhere else where O2. Well,
Ontario.
yeah, I think Kenny's move last week to move ahead with the vaccine verification requirements or however you want to call it. Uh, I think that hurt the Conservative Party on two fronts. O'Toole had aligned himself with Kenny on how Kenny had reopened, and there were all those ads where O'Toole was seen supporting, or those clips where O'Toole was seen supporting Kenny and the Alberta reopening plan. Well, that doesn't look good now for Liberal vote potential. Those Liberal Conservative Party people on that fence, they may have gone back to the Liberal Party now instead of voting Conservative. And then you have the rise of the PPC, of course, and potentially the Maverick as well in Alberta when it comes to people upset with, I think that's the most direct impact, people upset with the restrictions tightening up. And so, yeah, I don't know whether, I'm guessing Kenny probably tried holding off on implementing that as long as he could just to or to not have it impact O'Toole federally, but it looks like he was told he had to move ahead with it. I'm not sure,
But
but
but I think it gets back to, once again, who has jurisdiction?
oh,
Like, why are we what?
there's another thing. How did it take us this long to get to this? Because this has been a big part of this election
Oh, it's
campaign.
been brutal. All
Yeah.
parties just make up shit. Like, it's like, we're gonna do this. You have you have nothing to do with that. I'm sorry to tell
No.
you, but
Yeah.
one is the Trudeau and doctors. That's the one that is just like, I have a friend. He runs a clinic. Okay, he hires doctors for a living, and he's like, this is news to me. I didn't know that they did this. Like, it's brutal, and yeah, I don't know. What are we doing? Why is this a thing where we don't understand who has jurisdiction over what?
Well, because I think voters of all parties are maybe not fully as aware as we should be as to how that jurisdiction works. So, sure, doctor shortage. We know the healthcare system is strained, or we hear that, and here Trudeau is looking to solve that, even though it's provincial jurisdiction. So, yeah, that's one example. Housing would be another area where I don't quite understand all their housing policy. Everybody wants to make housing more affordable, but then at the same time, we're offering credits to help young people buy houses. That by itself is good, but never has increasing demand help prices drop. There's,
Yeah.
it's yeah, there's all kinds of backwards, and we see it in ag policy as well, federally, provincially. When things aren't going well, they blame each other. Then it's the other person's jurisdiction when it's not going well. So
I had a friend that said that they were voting NDP, and I asked how, what was the reason, like, why, and what's the main thing that grabs your attention, and they said healthcare and education spending. And there's an example where it's like, well, those are provincial things, right? So it's there's a lot of confusion, and it's not really. I get it. Like, I guess it tells us this: Canadians are concerned about those things, and they want governments
yes,
to fix them because they're concerned about it. But government sort of, even on the health stuff, it's, well, the feds don't share enough money, and stuff like that. Like, there's just the politicians do the blame game, and the reality is Canadians lose because nothing, those things don't get fixed. So, are we almost? What do you think? Are we almost done, or do you want? Where are you at? You have any more questions for me?
so you talked about this issue of trust and unity, or however we want to frame it, when it comes to our country going forward. What's your take on how we move on from the division and polarization and West versus East, and what is there anything that comes to mind that is going to help us move on from this right now?
We get rid of social media. Is that a good stance? We just ban Twitter. That's what that might help.
That's yeah.
It isn't helping. Let's just say that.
No. Well, and I think lockdowns, sorry to jump in. I
Yeah,
think
go ahead.
lockdowns are a big part of that too. I think with the lockdown rules that have been implemented through COVID, there's more echo chamber. We haven't had the informal social settings where we hear people with opposing views and have to talk to them face to face. Instead, we
Yeah.
hear opposing views on Twitter and are very quick to block or shut down or comment negatively, things that we wouldn't say face to face. So I think just quickly, I wanted to say lockdown, I think, has contributed to some huge echo chambers and amplified the polarization.
Here's a scenario that I think helps. And this was a personal one that I had 2 weeks ago. Had some friends over for supper. Okay. And almost like it was something out of like a past time, we finished supper and continued to sit around the supper table, had some wine, and we got into a lot of heavy discussion. One of them was politics. It was actually mostly politics. And there were people around the table that disagreed wholeheartedly with each other. And it was done in a respectful way. There was disagreements in a playful way. There was lots of sarcasm, and there was some laughs. But at the end of the day, everybody's still friends when it was over. And all of those people that are around the table, I didn't think I disagreed with half of them. Some of the things they said terrified me, but I still respect where they're coming from and the fact that that's their opinion. And they think, just like I do, they have an opinion on what's in the best interests of Canada. And we're all coming from different positions, some city, some rural. It was a pretty good cross section. And at the end of the day, we're still friends. We can still talk and still text and still get along. And I really do feel that we've moved, and this was, there is, I've heard numerous stories in the U.S. about, like divorces over the fact that one of the spouses was a Trump supporter. Or there's now situations where I was listening last week to Bloomberg, and they were talking about how divorces are up that are giving, one of the reasons is giving the two spouses can't agree on vaccinations. That's terrible, right? That tells you we've reached kind of a little bit of a breaking point in people's ability to just sort of communicate and listen and understand each other. So I don't know how you fix that, and I wish I could really help. But
Yeah.
I just give you that personal experience that I had a couple weeks ago and we even talked about that at the end of the night. We actually talked about this was kind of fun. Like
Yeah.
we didn't avoid any of the heavy topics. We just sort of like debated, and it was a great time.
Yeah, and I think that's something that we need to get back to as a society. We need to find ourselves in those places where we can have those face-to-face conversations, and from a place of respect, face-to-face, it's certainly very different than it is on social media. And I honestly, what we're doing right now, Shaun, I think, or I hope that maybe in the tiniest sliver of a way, maybe this helps contribute to driving some of that kind of discussion and thought process and critical thinking of politics and policy in our country too.
I hope so as well. Okay, hey everybody. Oh, we got. Jamie points out our former MP Bev Shipley says there's a lot of good that gets done in Ottawa that goes unnoticed. Very, very true. There's, the thing is, Jamie, that there is there's the snippets and the little quips, and there's advantage for politicians to do some of the things that they do in question period from a promotion standpoint. There's a lot of people that do a lot of stuff in Ottawa or some of the provincial capitals that is not glamorous, and it doesn't make the nightly news, and it does very much go unnoticed. That's a very good point.
And to add to that, I would encourage anybody, once Parliament resumes, to watch the Ag Committee work. The Ag Committee has people from at least 4 parties, and at least in the last session, they were an example of, to me, how politics should work in terms of laying aside their differences and the partisan stuff, and focusing on what's best for agriculture, what's best for farmers, and what's best for the agriculture industry in Canada. To me, that Ag Committee is would be an example of that. What Jamie's alluding to, and the good work that is done in Ottawa. The main the part that's really too bad is that committees, as we talked about before, the PMO has centralized control, and so committees they do lots of good work at the committee level, but it often doesn't go anywhere because the PMO wants control. And so ultimately you have to be on board with what the PMO wants under this government. And so that's where some of that good work doesn't come to fruition.
Yep, absolutely. We now have 31 Liberal, 11 Conservative, 1 Bloc, 295 seats to come. Kelvin, I have this feeling we are in for it's still a lot of time. It's only 7:30 Mountain, 9:30 Eastern. Like we got time here, but I think that is going to be it for us. Unless you have some more questions, Kelvin.
Jeremy just hopped on. Hi, Jeremy.
Where is he?
Jeremy Boychin.
Hey, Jeremy.
He probably thought he was tuning into the Agronomist. He's gonna.
He probably did.
Here we go. It's RealAg Politics versus the Agronomist.
So our plan is to, I don't know what our plan is yet. We are going to have regular RealAg Politics shows. He said he had to step away from CBC.
Oh, yes, of course.
So we are going to have regular RealAg Politics shows. It'll be sometimes myself, sometimes it'll be Kelvin, and maybe the two of us like it was tonight, routinely trying to bring in some guests and people of influence to talk about some of the issues that are affecting Canadians like we have tonight. And also obviously have a bit of an agricultural flair to it as well. It's something that a lot of you in the audience of Real Agriculture have brought up, that you would like to see a show like this. So you asked, and we intend to deliver. So we're looking forward to doing more of this definitely in the future. So, hey, Kelvin, this has been a lot of fun tonight.
One thing, Shaun, you asked me for my prediction tonight. You haven't made a prediction yet.
Oh, I thought I could get out of that. I'll stick to Brian Voss says, unpopular opinion, maybe. RealAg Politics is better than the Agronomists. Well, everybody has a different interest, Brian. I would say that, I better stick to what I said this morning. I was asked on RFD TV this morning in the U.S., and I said a liberal minority. And I think it is the most interesting thing is, will they get more seats or less seats to form that minority? What is the dispersal of seats amongst the second, third, and fourth place parties? Who do the Liberals have to partner with to get anything done? If it is less than they had last time in terms of number of seats for the Liberals, how quickly does the exit ramp? How quickly does Trudeau have to find that exit ramp? Somebody said this to me today. I shouldn't disclose who, but they said it reminds them of Harper in his last election, where he almost didn't seem like he actually wanted to win. Yeah. And I was like, that kind of sort of how this feels. Is his heart really in it? I think that's a justifiable question for a lot of people. He wanted a majority. We'll see after tonight whether he gets it or not. But minority is a lot of work. Like you're having to find dance partners all the time. It is nice to see the parties have to work together. They got stuff done, and that's the part of like. If it was a minority government they had and they couldn't get anything through because it's just nobody would like dance and it was just bringing down the government all the time, they got some stuff done. So that was not just really a justifiable excuse to have this election. I think the outcome's very interesting tonight, and this move from a coronation and sort of a world the last world tour for KISS is kind of how it felt with Trudeau calling this election, his trying to crisscross the country and sort of talk about how the great things he did through the pandemic and that kind of stuff from his side of the equation. It hasn't necessarily panned out that way at all. Jeremy says, I'm still trying to understand the point of this election. That's you and 30 million other people. Long-winded answer. I think the smart money, the Vegas money would bet that, I haven't seen the odds, but they're probably going Liberal minority, which is going to be For a lot of farmers and ranchers across the country, let's be honest, they're not all conservative, but a lot of them are, and it's going to be a tough pill for them to swallow, and they're going to be asking, what does it take to win an election? Not too long after liberals were asking the same question when Harper won numerous elections in a row. We tend to do this where we have long runs. And the other question, Kelvin, is we haven't talked about is under what result do we see, I know sometimes when I bring this up, people are like never, but I don't necessarily believe that, is do we see a real surfacing of the Maverick Party, which is essentially a Western version of the bloc, where Western separatism becomes is really their main thing, yeah. Right? So yeah, there's a lot of, depending on how the result goes tonight, there's a lot of really interesting outcomes that are almost more interesting than who wins, like in some ways.
Yeah.
And that sounds very odd, but I kind of believe it to be, sort of true.
So maybe to answer Jeremy's question, maybe the point is for entertainment purposes for people like us.
It gives us something to talk about.
But unfortunately, it's not just entertainment. This is real life.
Yeah, Brian says it's true. I read an article about this too, that minority governments are maybe better overall.
Yeah, more checks and balances for sure with minority.
Daryl says maybe he didn't want to win. Interesting. I'm not sure if Daryl's being sarcastic there or he's agreeing with me. Well, maybe he'll provide more context. There was no point, literally no point. I think that's what a lot of Canadians, I think not just on the conservative side, but I think across the board, that was really what hurt Trudeau early in the polls, is people just like, what? Come on. What we're actually going to go, we're going to do this? And then the question was, should they have actually called it earlier in the summer? Did they wait too long, right? They may have got that majority back in July that they possibly won't get here in September. So timing is everything, especially in politics.
Well, and initially people were like, well, he's waited too long now. That fourth wave is going to come and it's going to be detrimental to the Liberals. But I think that's actually been detrimental to the Conservatives, the fact that COVID is back in the spotlight and that there's concerns about rising cases and that sort of thing. I think that's been a big part of why the Liberals had this resurgence in at least the polls over the last number of weeks. The Conservatives were doing their best when the discussion was around cost of living and affordability and inflation and those economic financial issues. As soon as it turned back to the pandemic, that's when the polls also swung back to the Liberals. So yeah, you're right. Timing is a big part of this always. And certainly again, this campaign.
Yeah. What do we got here? 38 Liberals, 16 Conservative, 4 Bloc, 1 NDP, and 1 Green. I think that is the leading. That's not final call on polls or on seats. We have Petty Haidu. Oh, there's only 2 of 217 polls reporting. That's fairly early.
Yeah, and that's just leading. It's not. There's actually a chance that Elizabeth May is the only Green Party MP again after this. Anna May Paul has campaigned hard in Toronto Centre, but that's a very difficult. It's a Liberal stronghold. So the Green Party, we haven't talked about that as much today either, but Green Party is a mess, and their leader likely won't win tonight. And the past leader, who seems to still have her connections in the party brass, will likely be the only MP again, potentially.
So is she the leader again in the next election?
I don't know if they can go back to. It's just it is already the party of Elizabeth May, or that's been one of the big criticisms. And here they're trying to move on. And Anna May Paul, I think, has a lot of charisma and has resonated with a lot of people, but not enough in her riding to win her riding, I guess. So yeah, I'm guessing they'll have to have a different leader.
Yeah. Some good questions.
Sorry, you were wrapping it up before, and now we're going.
No, well, you and I were probably going to chat for the next however long anyway, so whatever. Jeremy says if he's brought all of these people together to vote with the same result, what a waste of time, money, and risk. So yeah, Jeremy, we talked about that, pretty in depth. That is sort of what is viewed as a win, what is viewed as a loss. You don't need to win the election to claim it as a win, depending on who you are. Singh doesn't expect to win tonight on the NDP side, but there's scenarios where he can say, "Hey, victory!" Right? We accomplished more. We got what we want. We have more influence, and if you look how the seats break down. We're really the go-to if the Liberals want to get anything done. So you don't have to necessarily win the election to say victory, but really for the Liberals, majority is the victory, and maybe anything shy is probably deemed. It just raises more questions. Especially when we're spending $600 million on the election. Is that what the number is?
Yeah, I think that's what Elections Canada said it costs. So yeah, it's yeah, that's where even if the Liberals win a minority, if Trudeau has like a very positive victory speech tonight, I think he's starting off on the wrong foot. He's already going to be starting off on the wrong foot with people feeling the way Jeremy's feeling that same sentiment. I think majority of Canadians will be, because this could be the first election where, according to the polls at least, no party gets over a third of the vote. So if it's close in the end.
So what does that tell? So that it's like we're getting close to like where we're like Sweden. We don't have like 20 parties, but does that tell us anything? Does it mean that we have numerous viable options? Does that mean that we're more divided than ever? What does that tell us if it's no party gets over a third? What do we take from that?
Well, I think in many ways it does show that nobody has like a real united message, or has a real uniting effect on Canadians at this point, where you're able to get a plurality or a large portion of the population. And of course, this is only among the Canadians that even bothered to go vote today. Never mind all the people that didn't feel motivated to vote. So like that's always one of the criticisms too. If voter turnout is low, what percentage of the actual population voted for a mandate? We hear political parties, including the Liberals, often say, well, 2019 gave us a clear mandate to increase the carbon tax. Canadians showed in the 2019 election that they wanted that to happen, even though many people would disagree with that. That's just an example where, yeah, here, how do you have a clear mandate? How does Trudeau say Canadians obviously want us to do this if only a third of the Canadians that voted actually voted for their party? That's something that I think is part of this whole issue of how does our country move forward in terms of being united or polarized. And I think in many ways the fact that nobody can, at least in the polls, potentially, it right now the Liberals, I believe, have like 40% of the votes that have been counted so far, but that's starting in the East. And so I'm assuming that number will get closer with the Conservatives. But if they're only at a third of the popular vote, that's tough to say that you have a clear mandate.
And out of this campaign, what would the mandate be? Like really, if they had a majority tomorrow, like what's the mandate? Like what was the, like there was in the past, like legalization of cannabis. That's a mandate.
Yeah.
Like, hey, Canadians spoke. They told us. The carbon tax, you alluded to that example. What's the big idea in this election? Like
spending,
okay,
programs on the pandemic, I think, and continuing those and then childcare. We haven't talked about that. The $10 a day childcare dream that Trudeau has laid out and signed agreements with some provinces. I think that's a big idea. That's something they could say they have a mandate to do if they win. And they'll just, I think, in many ways, more of the same when it comes to climate policy and those sorts of approaches. So, yeah,
Cody says a minority government can certainly turn into a bit of a game when it comes to trying to get anything done, depending on how the numbers of seats turn out. You are very correct, Corey. Jeremy asks, will you do a follow-up post-election considerations for the ag industry show? Well, that sounds like a hell of an idea.
There you go.
We should do that. Question from Jamie, who says, is trade more at risk with a minority, or does a majority government just give more investors confidence in Canada? Maybe not a direct correlation.
That investment aspect, I think a majority would give companies more of a signal, a clear signal as to where the government's going. Whether that drives investment or discourages investment, it could go both ways. But it's more of a clear signal for sure. I think with a minority, it's harder to predict what the environment will be like. But yeah, in terms of pursuing trade,
especially if that investment pertains to legislation, right?
yeah.
So let's think about the clean fuel standard as an example. So you've got a lot of investment, and so a majority really gives that investment and future investment confidence that they're going to see that through, as opposed to electing a different party where all of a sudden it's like, no, we're killing it, right? And so all of a sudden you've like, we're gonna lose millions of dollars here, right? So I think you're very, very correct on that point.
Same with the oil industry or oil and gas in Alberta. We've seen that as well with investment from when it comes to Liberal policy and the impact that it's had on investment in Canada. But yeah, the clean fuel standard would be an example too, where we saw the day that regulation was announced, within weeks of that, we saw all kinds of announcements. So companies were waiting for that.
Brian says we need a ballot with major issues listed. Winning party has to go with the vote, not party line. Yeah. We're not good at those non-party line votes.
That's another thing. Going back to that Jody Wilson-Raybould book, she is a non-partisan type person and was looking for that in Ottawa. And I think we need more people that aren't as tied to the party, more tied to good ideas in politics. And so, yeah, whatever changes move us in that direction. Let's try that. But we're not good at that, like you said.
But what? Okay, so just I agree with that though. But so what can that happen? Is that possible? It didn't work out well for her. What would need to change to allow for that kind of? We see it a lot more in the U.S. politics. There is a lot of pressure to vote. There's party whips, just like there is here, but you are not punished to the extent that people are here if they don't vote with the party. If you vote here if you don't vote with the party here, you're like excommunicated.
You're on the back bench.
Yep. Like it's like, just try to hang around long enough to collect your pension. You shall. We were talking about pettiness earlier. That's where it's beyond petty when it comes to voting against the party. Even when your constituents who elected you in your riding may not, they may feel differently than the party. And then you got to ask yourself, who do you represent? And yeah, it sort of does go against some of the, it doesn't make sense. It's sort of a discombobulated, or however that word is, sort of situation.
Yeah, and I think we've talked a fair bit about the centralized control that the PMO has accumulated. It was certainly something that the Liberals were very critical of the Conservatives of during the Harper era, and I think the Liberals haven't backed off at all in terms of that trend. So there needs to be structural change to give more power back to MPs and to ministers. I believe less control from that centralized, especially the non-elected bureaucrats, the Jerry Butts and Katie Telfords around Justin Trudeau. To me, in a democracy, it should be the elected people that are calling the shots and influencing policy instead of having the second and third most powerful people be unelected.
John is watching on YouTube. He says, RealAg Politics is a good thing. Glad you started it. Hoping for the Maverick Party to get a few seats to set the tone going forward. The Western vote is the most interesting thing about this election. John's getting at what we were talking about earlier, that maybe who wins isn't the most interesting part. It's actually what are some of the fallouts. The
messages that are sent. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I think that would send I think our Ottawa-centered press gallery bubble in Ottawa, if there are some interesting results like that in the West, that would become, it's something that they maybe haven't been fully aware of, I think, in terms of the national narrative so far. So I think some interesting results like that would send some messages.
Absolutely.
And then again, they could have, and like you said before, in a minority government, especially if it's really close, those MPs could potentially be quite influential in determining legislation, whether it passes or not.
Question here from Jeremy. And I was on an airplane, so I'm not sure I can answer this question. But someone mentioned the very progressive leaning structure of the only English debate of the election. Structure and questions put majority of discussion at Conservative Party disadvantage. Thoughts? Now, I will add a point here. Some of the stuff I had read, people felt the exact opposite. They felt that it was very much in the favor of the Conservative Party, the way that the debate format was. Do you have any opinion on this, Kelvin?
I watched the debate, and I can see where people have that point of view that Jeremy's alluding to here. Yeah, when you get into more of the social issues and the things that the NDP and Liberal Green Party like to spend more money on than the Conservatives, I think there was a fair bit of discussion about those topics in the English debate. But some of this goes back to that whole debate format and how we have this debate commission or consortium this year that organized these debates and the way it was structured. I don't know in the future whether we go back to having no consortium and everybody just organizes, whoever wants to organizes a debate, and the politicians then weigh the pros and cons of participating.
Right.
It might. I think there needs to be more of a shift back in that direction. At the same time, you want to have all the leaders participate, so it'd be easy if we went back to that kind of Wild West debate type structure. It might or scenario. It might not. We might not get the head-to-head debate with all the main leaders, but yeah, I think there's some flaws in how the debate commission is structured, and that it will have been through that process that these topics were chosen for the debate, and so
I
yeah.
say let's get
Aaron
rid
O'Toole
of.
could have opted out of it, I guess,
That's true.
if it's too, but he would have faced. Of course, that would have been a story for a couple days at least as well.
I say we kill this English English French debate structure. We go with it's a bilingual debate, and we can have interpretations, and we have maybe 2-3 debates, and they decide which debates are about which topics. And I think it would give Canadians a lot more opportunity to understand how all the parties feel about certain issues as they impact all Canadians, as opposed to kind of what we do currently. And I get it. We have 2 official languages, and I think you can still respect that. We did it at the Ag Leaders debate, and people, and I tweeted about this, and some people said that the bilingual would really not allow for interaction between the candidates. And I think that if you saw the Ag Leaders debate, there was lots of interaction between the candidates. You need to make sure that people are getting words in, people are being allowed to get their point out across, and really, essentially, we're not in is a good debate where people are just talking over each other. I don't think so. I think a good debate is where somebody makes a point and somebody counterpoints and gets their shots in, right? So I think we need to really reconsider the current structure that we have when it comes to English and the French component. I think those two things could be put together.
I watched some of the French debate while we were combining canola, and watched it through the translation, and it's interesting how the answers are different, or they speak to Quebecers specifically in a lot of their answers instead of Canadians. Yeah. And so that's where I think if we combine the debates, we would get, instead of having 2 different sets of answers depending on who your audience is, I think it'd be better to have everybody be transparent about their message to all Canadians. And Jeremy makes a good point here too about how the topics that are discussed in the debate, they essentially, for many Canadians that do watch, instead of watching that, there was a good Jays game on that night too. So I'm not sure how many Canadians were watching the debate versus in the past, but it creates a lens for the importance of topics, or at least a perception of which topics are most important. So that's something where the media plays a role in determining that, for sure.
Heaven forbid if we actually learned about each other. Like, whew, wow, like that would just be, that's a tall order. But hey, you use it from sort of through our lens at Real Agriculture. In some ways, we do talk about agriculture from across the country, and I listen. I know that You talk about something that's going on in the Maritimes. That's not your backyard in BC, right? And that may not be your issue, but you may have an issue that's similar to that. And I think I get way more emails from people and calls and texts where people are like, I didn't know that was going on. Thanks for bringing that up. I'm glad to hear somebody else is dealing with that crap. There's way more issues in common, even in the mainstream, that we don't seem to be able to come together on and recognize that there's just a lot of similarities. And so that's it's an issue in ag, and it's an issue also in the mainstream as well. What else I got here?
That's more of an inspirational speech there, Shaun, than I've heard from any of the leaders this whole election campaign.
No, never. If I ever, you have permission to hit me with a baseball bat. Okay, so we got 67 Liberal, 37 Conservative, 11 NDP, 9 Bloc, and 1 Green at this point in the election. When is RealAg forming a federal party? Well, we've got like 6 in the mix. Why not a 7th? We used to have a UFA party in Alberta, right? Probably other provinces did too. There was probably a farmers' party in other parts of the country. There had to be.
Well, the NDP didn't the NDP get its start as a farmers' party in Saskatchewan?
Very well could have.
Yeah, CCF, I believe, is the abbreviation.
Somebody watching will know the history on that.
Yep.
Has to. Somebody has to know the history on that one.
John with some.
John, your ag debate was way better than the main debates, how a debate should be run. Well, I appreciate that, John. We tried. Canadian Federation of Agriculture put a lot of work into it, so they get a lot of credit for the organization and making all of that happen. Well, we're starting to get some polls closed in Manitoba and Saskatchewan, or some results in for Manitoba and Saskatchewan. So,
Will the Liberals win? Oh, no, they're not. Last election, they had no seats between Winnipeg and Vancouver, right? Or Winnipeg and BC, and I don't.
It was kind of Jim Carr's island.
Yeah.
How's his seat?
It's a good question. I know the Conservatives used to hold it under when Harper was Prime Minister. Lawrence Todt, I believe, or Joyce Bateman. I'm not sure who the MP was there, and I'm assuming it's on the Conservatives' possible win list, but I'm pretty sure Carr would be a pretty safe re-election candidate.
How about
he'd be another one that could be on the Ag Minister's potential list. He's been the Prairie, what's his title? Representative to the Prairies?
Special advisor to the Prairies or something like that.
Something like that. Yeah. So
yeah,
I know he has some connections to the ag community, some of the businesses in Winnipeg, like the Richardsons. He used to be the CEO of the Manitoba Business Council, which has some heavy ag companies on its board. So he'd have some connections in ag. And I know during the wheat board back in the 2010-2012 era, I remember interviewing Jim Carr as the Manitoba Business Council CEO. He was in favor of ending the single desk, and now he's a Liberal candidate. So certainly, he has some ag credentials as well. So add him to that list too, I guess.
But he's done things above that though. Like he was energy minister, trade minister.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, he was energy minister, wasn't he?
Energy or natural resource? I'm not sure what the title was.
When they bought the pipeline.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess he would be a good selection, especially for the Prairies, if it is a Liberal government. I don't know. It definitely a name to be for sure considered. Seeing a lot of red on the screen. 81 Liberal, 39 Conservative, 13 Bloc, 13 NDP, and 1 Green. Huh.
Yeah, I'm not sure how this would compare with what the expectations were right now at this point.
Right. Well, it's just like you said, it's just all east. So
Yeah.
don't really get worked up yet. Jamie O'Shea says, would less official parties make for a greater or lesser voter turnout?
We've seen in the U.S. less parties. Certainly, you have more polarization. Well, I'm not sure. We have lots of polarization here too, but then you have your family is either a Republican or a Democrat. Kind of you inherit that almost from your parents. But yeah, I don't know. Turnout what would U.S. turnout be compared to Canada? I'm not sure.
I don't know off the top of my head.
Yeah.
My answer to James is going to be, I think more parties bring out more votes. And I'll use the People's Party as an example.
Yeah.
Saw lots of tweets where, and I'm assuming people are telling the truth, but have never voted before.
Yeah.
Voting for the People's Party.
Or for sure, lawn signs. People putting up purple lawn signs that I know have never put up a lawn sign for any party before.
We have a real lack of lawn signs here in Alberta. I don't know. Okay. Our local MP is Rachel Harder from the Conservatives, and maybe she just knows it's in the bag for her, and so they didn't want to spend the money on the signs. But I just noticed a real lack of. And actually, David Coletto commented too from Abacus Data last week on RealAg Radio that he had also noticed the same thing in his riding. And that could sort of, the other thing about that too is the printing of them, and it's a short election. It takes time to get them out. That might be a factor, or maybe just speaks to it's that money's way better spent, like we talked about earlier, on social media, TikTok and Instagram and Twitter and things like that.
Brian with a good point. Maybe your signs all just blew away, Shaun.
Well, I am in Lethbridge. There is somebody down the street from me that has a Harder sign up, and it's like they're on a corner lot, and it's like, a lawn sign is typically like not terribly big. This thing is like a billboard. Like when the election is over, they could put like a Tim Hortons advertisement on this thing. It is so big. Like the holes for those posts, like they are. I'm not exaggerating. They're like 3 inches by 3 inches. They are huge. So it gets my attention every time. I guess mission accomplished. You got my attention as I drive through the neighborhood. But it's just, usually you see those big signs like in rural areas, like on acreages, on the highway and things like that. This is like in a city or, suburb. So there you go. I don't know. It's elections. Any more questions?
I think going back to what Jamie said about less official parties, I think, like you said, if we have more parties, I think you have a better chance of messages resonating with people and motivating them to come out and vote. But at some point, though, you realize that those votes aren't worth as much when you're voting for a party that will never be in government, of course, or in power.
At least this time around, yeah.
Yeah.
John asked the question, will RealAg Politics also have similar roundtables with provincial ag ministers? This would be great to see. If you're speaking about like a debate, that's a really good idea, John. Would love to be a part of more of those kinds of discussions in the future. I've hosted a couple debates with APAS, which is the Saskatchewan General Farm Organization under the CFA. We've done a few of them. We definitely like to do more. It's a good space for us. It really gets the discussion about agriculture going. So I appreciate your support on that. Jeanette says, I wouldn't mind if lawn signs went by the wayside, tired of playing sign or deer. What is sign? What is sign or deer?
No, when you're driving in the dark, Shaun, and something you see just the shape of something in the distance.
That's true.
And
okay.
Slam on the brakes. Oh, it's just a sign.
That's okay. That's fair.
And of course, just all the garbage and everything that gets wasted with making all those signs. I'd be on board with not having lawn signs be as big a part of it. But
are they effective?
I don't know.
Like, when you think about it, like I understand, like on a major street, like the one that goes by here is the one that goes from the edge of the west side of Lethbridge to the university. So there's a lot of traffic. I get that. But like a lawn sign, like for a residential area, is it like, ooh, Kelvin's voting this way. Maybe I should vote that. Like, is that what we're trying to get at, or what are we trying to do? Or is
Oh
it
yeah,
just
there's some of
exposure?
that for sure. Yeah. Well, I think humans we like to go with what's popular. Or often, if we feel like something's a trend, I think a lot of people just subconsciously want to be part of that, whatever's cool. And so, if we see lots of signs, I think there's a psychological thing there where, for example, in our riding, we've got so many purple signs around. I bet there's some voters that are like, well, this People's Party thing, I should check it out because obviously there's lots of excitement about it. They have all these signs out. So there's some aspect of that. There's also the case where what percentage of these candidates are unknown? It's 80% of the candidates running tonight are people that aren't familiar to voters. So just the fact that they have to get the signs out, I think, just to even know what the name is of the candidate in the riding for a lot of parties, these people aren't going to get elected, but for some name recognition. But yeah, in the end, I don't know what percent of like how much vote can you sway by winning the sign battle. I'm skeptical that that's a very significant number. What do you think?
No, that's fair. I was going to ask you about door knocking. Is that effective?
Apparently, it is. I campaign strategists would say like that is the ultimate way of connecting with people and getting them to vote for you, at least. And the data collection, I guess, that comes from that too, when they record like these parties, especially the conservative and liberal parties, these days have quite in-depth databases, not just Excel spreadsheets on how people are going to vote. So yeah, I'm guessing this election door knocking maybe was less effective. I've heard of some cases where people didn't answer the door because of being scared of COVID stuff, and I don't. Yeah, but
We had one party come to the door.
come to the door.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah. I wasn't
I can't.
home, but yeah, there was one party.
We live on a gravel road. We had nobody came down our road, but our riding also is a riding where the Conservative Party won 70% last time. So I know they did some door knocking, but I'm guessing it's not nearly as intense as in some of these three-way race ridings.
Daryl, we were talking about signs, whether they're effective. Daryl says, effective? Put an NDP sign up in Red Deer like I may have done. You'll get a conversation going and more.
Yeah.
So I think this is good, though. This is, I appreciate that comment, Daryl. And yeah, very true. But I'll say this. We've had people commenting here tonight, saying, I'd like to see the Maverick Party get some votes. We've got people saying I'd like to see the NDP get some votes and a whole bunch of stuff in between. So I think it shows that we can have a kind of a fun discussion about what we're seeing tonight with the election.
There may be some
and
sarcasm
politics.
in here still, Shaun.
Yeah. Well, Brian says, Kelvin, you sound so sad when you say that. What were you saying you sounded sad?
I think when I said that nobody knocked on our door,
Oh, well, yeah.
yeah,
Are,
I'm not too
are,
sad.
are you somebody, if somebody did knock on the door, would you invite them in to ask, to penetrate them with questions? Or,
I probably would be, I'm
yeah, me
maybe not,
too.
you can make fun of, you can make fun of me for that, but I, it's something I've actually thought, like, we've never, we just moved to our farm here just over a year ago, and I've thought, well, we should invite our MLA or MP come down and see what we do on the farm kind of thing. And so it'd be cool to, I don't know whether they would actually come down, but
Who's your MP?
Candice Bergen,
Oh, it is Candice Bergen.
deputy leader of the Conservative Party right now.
How safe is her seat?
I think it's quite safe, but this whole PPC popularity wave, they again had some huge rallies in our riding here. So I don't think that they will win or that the PPC will win, but I think they will probably make a significant dent in her vote total versus last election.
Okay. Yeah, I think
Yeah.
there's a lot of conservative ridings that are probably having that exact same conversation.
Yeah. Well, and those are the ridings that have the strongest CPC or strongest PPC wave happening. It's the ridings where 50 to 70% of the people went conservative last election. Those are the ridings where we're seeing the strongest People's Party support. So that's where the People's Party has a long way to go to get to winning those seats. Whereas if that was happening in some of these tighter ridings, the People's Party might have a better chance at winning those seats. So
Basically, what we've done tonight is you and I would have talked on the phone the entire night anyways. So this is just, we've let everybody in on our conversation.
Well, and there's been lots of good questions
There
and
has
comments
been.
here too that we wouldn't get to otherwise.
Leslyn
And
Lewis
thought-provoking.
is early, couple hundred vote lead in her riding
Okay.
with 5 of 262 reporting. So very early, but she is off to a very early lead in her riding. And we have had some great questions and comments. I didn't mean to
Yeah.
underscore that at all. Just trying to see here. Yeah. I love some of the
We were talking
graphics
about,
they use on TV.
yeah.
It's very fancy.
Which channel are you watching?
I have it on CBC and CTV.
Okay.
The CPAC is also running coverage. I could,
Yes, I saw that.
yeah, yeah.
I think Coletto's on there. I think
He's on
that
CPAC.
you,
Yeah, he's on
yeah.
CPAC tonight. So our interview tomorrow morning is not right first thing in the morning because of how late they will be up doing it. It's a long night for the pundits on TV, and trying to like, not everybody is the John King that can talk about like every county and and break some of that down. To be able to talk about some of these ridings across the country, there's lots of good producers talking in their ear as well. Should mention that they're not left alone at those desks, but it's a long night for those pundits to kind of break all this down.
Yeah, for sure. What are they on there? 8 hours probably. I guess it might depend on when they make the call tonight, but it's a long, and most of them aren't. It's not something to do every day, so it's it would be. I'm not sure what all goes into it, but I guess we're kind of doing that here with what are we on 2 hours?
Yeah, we
Just over
are.
2 hours here already.
Okay, so we were talking earlier about Chatham, Kent, Leamington. So 10 of 272 polls reporting. Dave Epp is out to the early lead. He's the incumbent for the Conservative Party. He has about a 100 vote lead over the Liberal candidate, Greg Hetherington. And currently the PPC candidate has 139% of the vote, whereas Dave Epp has 39. So,
Okay.
he would be leading that it's early, but he would be leading that riding quite handedly if it wasn't for those PPC votes. So this is the story that we will continue to see. And do the Conservatives lose any seats because of this? Well, I think that's probably Aaron O'Toole's one of his biggest concerns.
What'd you say he's at now? Ep has 39%,
Yes. And the
and he was at
Liberals at 32.
okay, and it's still early, but last election Ep won with 47%, so that's the impact of the PPC right there.
Right there. Look at that. Look at us breaking it down. Hold on here. Just bear with me.
I was gonna look up Bibo's writing here.
Find my writing. Manitoba's starting to report a little bit in northern Manitoba. Well, sorry, actually, northern Saskatchewan. Sorry, I'm looking at here.
Here, early results from Beauce. That's Maxime Bernier's riding. Conservative candidate Richard Lahou, incumbent at 44%, and Bernier's at 13%. So
He's in
that's with
trouble.
10. That's with only a few 10 polls reporting. So still a long way to go, but not off to the start that he will.
He was looking for. Yeah.
And then here, Bibeau is out front with 35% of the vote in Compton, Stansted, Quebec.
Well,
the bloc is at 27%. So
we were talking about Candice Bergen earlier. This is your riding.
but
It's early.
What's happening here?
7 of 240 polls reporting. She's got 53% of the vote, and the PPC is in second place at 19. So the NDP has 14, and the Liberal candidate, Andrew Carrier, falls behind at 13%. So her seat, too many S's. Her seat looks relatively safe early on, but the PPC in second place. Solomon Weeb is the PPC candidate in that riding.
And that's similar to what we were talking about with Epp. So Candace Bergen had, I believe, just under 70% of the vote in 2019. Now she's at 53 with a couple polls reporting here. So again, still a conservative, handily winning the riding, but not to the same huge amount that they had as the PPC cuts into that lead.
Yeah. Jim Carr, we were talking about him earlier. He's in Winnipeg South Centre, very early, 3 of 201 polls, but he has a 47% of the vote. Joyce Bateman is the conservative candidate at 30%. So Mr. Carr is off to the lead that he would definitely like to
Bateman
see.
was the MP under Harper for that area.
Okay, cool. Okay, I actually forgot about that. What else we got? See, I can be John King. Brandon Suris in Manitoba. Larry McGuire is off to a huge start. 7 of 188. He has 60% of the vote. Whitney Hodgkin, my son's calling me. Whitney Hodgson's has 18% of the vote. So Larry McGuire is off to a very large lead early on there. So his riding looks fairly safe. So that's kind of fun. Not going to restart it. Greens, PPC. Yeah, so it's total elected or leading. Liberals 128, Conservative 62, the Bloc 26, the NDP 17, and the Greens 1 is where we are at this very moment.
And we're starting to see a little bit of a tightening of the vote spread, but the percentage of votes going Liberal versus Conservative. Liberal down to 40.3% according to Elections Canada website here. 40.3% of the popular vote Liberal so far, 32.5% Conservative so far. NDP at 16.5%, which I forget what they got last election, but I don't think that sounds like a big increase. They'll be looking for a higher number than that, and I'm not sure as the numbers come in from further west whether that number will climb.
I'm just hearing Maxime Bernier on CBC talking about declaring success because they're at 6% of the vote, as I believe was what he said. So,
well, and that's going back to what we were saying before. Bernier probably has the easiest path to declaring that this is a victory. The result tonight, he has the most obvious way of making that claim. Versus, I think the 3 main party leaders, they have a much tougher route to declaring that this is a big win tonight.
Yeah. Find my writing. Too many people using this website. We're starting to get some reporting in Calgary. Oh, that's way too early. It was 1 poll reporting.
1 poll, yeah.
Same. Way too early for Alberta. What was the Bibeau riding?
Compton Stansted. And she'd be one of these MPs that's been in since 2015, I believe. So that October 19th date is significant for her pension. Not saying that's why she's running.
Well, it is.
She's from the class of 2015, which they are the candidates that will have their eye on that pension.
I wonder how much that's been discussed behind closed doors as far as how people really feel about that.
Well, it's one of those things that might not get said. They might laugh about it, kind of make the awkward joke about it, but I'm sure all of these, most MPs count on having that income from being an MP. They're not necessarily all coming from the Mark Carney background.
Right. While I'm looking for this, do you feel that is he somebody that has ambition? He was rumored to be running in this election and he turned it down, but do you think he has ambition for the actual leadership?
I think he does. And it's one of those things. It's just like if you cheer for the Leafs and watch TSN talk about Toronto endlessly, to use a sport. We haven't used any sports analogies this far. Even if things aren't true initially, if it gets reported by Darren Dreger on TSN and they talk about it endlessly all summer, it becomes true. Mitch Marner all of a sudden is a $10 or $11 million player. And I think the same thing happens in politics. So whether Carney is seriously considering it or not, the endless discussion about it, I think it will push him towards looking at it at least. And you mentioned Chrystia Freeland running before. I wonder whether she hasn't been too close to Trudeau, and whether her brand is going to carry the baggage of Trudeau if and when he decides to exit the stage. So I think Carney is a potential front runner as much as Freeland is for who the Liberal Party's next leader would be. There could be lots of other people potentially too, but
just like we didn't see somebody super close to Harper take over after he left. Maybe a little bit different reasons, but
yeah, exactly. When there's a push for change, if Freeland wants to be the next leader, she's going to have to try to put some space between her and Trudeau before that when that race starts happening, I guess. So
it is really early in Compton Stansted, but Minister Bibeau, Ms. Bibeau, has 34.1%, and the Bloc has 26. Yeah. So CBC is projecting a Liberal government.
Okay.
So there you go. We waited around long enough for that.
Making the call already.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, we lasted long. Yeah.
Look at that.
Okay.
So, yeah. People are lighting up my phone, texting me.
Yeah.
Okay, so I can't tell you, but that sucked the life out of my night. What else do I got here? How can they? So here's a legit question. I can't use some of the words. I can't use some of the words that people put in this text, but how can they call a win already?
Yeah, I don't know the methodology behind it. It does seem early in terms of the number of polls that are reporting, but yeah, there has to be some aspect of taking a gamble here when you make a call, no? Or wouldn't and at the same time, it doesn't happen that often that you see somebody reverse a call after it's made, right? So
yeah, well, if you remember back to the 2000, the last fall election for the in the U.S.
with Arizona.
Yeah, Fox called Arizona, and that was the beginning of really a lot of the questions about the result. And I'm not saying that's happening in this case, but just they called it early, and a lot of people really thought in that situation Fox was way out ahead of themselves. And it was sort of, there's a bit of irony there because it was Fox and it wasn't MSNBC. It was Fox calling Arizona against the president. And it really led to, it was sort of the where a lot of the questions sort of ignited. And it sort of really foiled President Trump's strategy on what he was going to do that evening, even if he did lose. So, hey, it's great to see Deb on here. So, yeah, she says it's actually okay if you haven't used a sport or Hollywood reference yet. I have. I mentioned Jerry Maguire. I was quoting Jerry Maguire earlier. So you missed that. Brian says because they have enough seats to guarantee at least a minority. Well, I don't know if that's the case yet.
They're leading in 140 some seats now, the Liberals are. But yeah, I don't know the numbers, the underlying numbers. CBC might have a better database on that than what we do right at our fingertips right here in terms of knowing how many of those ridings are declared already, are determined already.
Yeah, so once again, I'll use a U.S. example. I remember when Fox did call Arizona, the person that led the decision desk at Fox really had a lot of explaining to do during the next several days and weeks of daytime shows. And the amount of data and analysis that goes into that call, it's not just sort of like what do we sort of see in the wind here? It is backed by data and what the trend is, and they have all the ridings all broken down, which way they are likely to go based on obviously polling and past results, and it's probably much more of an analytical process than a lot of people kind of appreciate. But it is early.
Yeah.
BC's polls closed yet? That's the thing that comes up lots, is that the election is over before people in BC even get finished voting. But what else I got here?
Have the others called? Has CTV called too?
CTV is called, and CBC.
Okay.
Hold on here. I gotta switch the channel again. Brian, wasn't your liberal? Well, it was. I didn't say I had the analytics. I said that CBC and CTV did. Don't do that to me, Brian. Let's see here. Let's go to Global. Global is saying
If CBC and CTV are declaring, it's probably they'll follow the pack.
So how long? Okay, let's. If it is called, I would assume that Mr. O'Toole would not concede this early. At least I wouldn't if I was him. How long till the Prime Minister comes out? Does he wait to the very end of the evening?
I don't think he waits till the end of the evening. They can't jump the gun now.
Yeah.
All right.
Michelle Rempel Garner has been declared the winner in her seat.
Okay, that's not a surprise.
No.
But this goes back to that tone that Trudeau, like in terms of uniting the country and not just rubbing it in and leaving Canadians with a sour taste with this election. Like I'm not even sure how Trudeau gets past. Like if it's possible for him to not leave the majority of Canadians with a sour taste coming out of tonight. So to go on early now and celebrate and when it's not even, when people haven't even cast their vote potentially, if they're going in right before the polls close in BC, I'm not sure where we're at on that timeline right now, but it just, to me, the whole tone, if he went out early now, would be another reason for people to be frustrated with this whole election process and the way it was called.
Francois Philippe Champagne wins his seat. I don't think a surprise either. So there's another name that many people will be familiar with. Mr. Blanchette of the Bloc wins his seat quite handily, actually. 2,500 votes, and the next person had like 600. So he won very, very easily, declared a winner. So stuff's starting to come in. We have 141 Liberal, 143, 100 Conservative, 28 Bloc, 24 NDP, 1 Green. So CTV, yes, Kelvin, I can confirm them because I can see it on the TV. CTV has called a Liberal win as well. So, okay, so if you are Mr. O'Toole, you have to have a level of, you have to have kind of a level of discipline. You don't know how many seats you're going to win, but you're kind of disappointed. You thought maybe this would, it was a little tighter than this, maybe. Not to say it's not tight, but
yeah,
it's only 10:30 Eastern.
I think if you watch the campaigns the last week, it's almost like they knew that this is what was going to happen. They've just kind of been stuck. The Conservatives have over the last week with there hasn't been any days where they've dominated the discussion with a positive announcement or a policy idea, and so it's almost like he knew this was coming, and I wonder whether he hasn't already shifted into saving his leadership. I think that's
interesting. So you thought they were quiet? You thought they were just really quiet in the last week?
Well, I don't know whether it was just the resurgence of COVID in the headlines or what it was, but early on in the election, there were quite a few days where O'Toole and his announcements were driving the headlines and the discussion of the day when it was coming to affordability and some of those issues. I thought the Conservatives actually, that's back when the Afghanistan crisis was unfolding as well. The Liberals were having a lot of bad days in a row, and the last week, and maybe even a little bit longer than that, there haven't been many days where the Conservatives have been able to come out with an idea and have it be what people are talking about, what the media is talking about, and so I don't know. I think if you looked at the campaigns, you could almost see that their internal polls were maybe indicating this already. I'm not sure, but yeah. it.
They lost
I'm
steam.
curious what his speech will be like tonight too, because
Yeah.
O'Toole will have to hit the stage as well. And what does he completely pivot now to trying to appeal to the base and try to save his leadership, or is there some, I don't know. Yeah,
Well,
I'm assuming there will be some of that because he'll want a state leader.
he is not beyond a pivot. Like we've seen pivots already,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
So during the leadership campaign, he pivoted towards away from Peter MacKay and pivoted more to, very much more like social conservatism from that aspect, and then got the leadership, and then somewhat, some would say, under being critical, he pivoted more to the center of the political pendulum to try to win that election. So maybe there's a bigger question here. Where does Mr. O'Toole stand when it comes? Like, where does he really stand when it comes to some of the issues? Another person with some ambition is, I see Bill Blair is reelected for the Liberals. Another person with ambition, and she ran the leadership race, was Leslyn Lewis. That's actually an interesting sort of thing here. Is that she is much more of a libertarian candidate. She sort of does negate some of the things that Mr. Bernier talks about that makes him different from the Conservative Party. So that's an interesting thing to kind of watch here. Going back to my I think I'm sort of vilified, or I'm sort of proven to be right here, that maybe the outcomes of what happens as a result of tonight is more interesting than who wins, if this is the way that it all ends up.
yeah, and I think O'Toole's camp can make the argument they aren't going to lose seats to the PPC, I believe. So I think there is still a case to be made for going to the middle for the Conservative Party to win more seats, but it doesn't look like it's going to make a big difference tonight, leading in 105 now versus 147 for the Liberal Party. So I that's going to continue to be the big debate in the Conservative Party, is how wide do we have to make this tent, and at what point does the tent come apart again to win an election? What does it take? And that's something that Harper did successfully, but he's been and he maintained respect from the base in many ways. But you talked about O'Toole trying to widen that and definitely pivot from where his social conservative true blue campaign that he ran for the leadership. Look no further than Brian Mulroney and the former prime minister that he brought out on the campaign trail last week. Mulroney was exactly that too, known for he got support from the base, but eventually he was known for swinging back and forth and being more moderate or centrist than what a lot of the base wanted as well. So, and I think that's something that I'm not sure why O'Toole brought Mulroney out this last week. It seemed like a desperate move in some ways.
Yeah.
Like he's talking about how this isn't your parents' Conservative Party. This is a new, softer around the edges Conservative Party than in the past. I'm not sure why bringing back a past progressive Conservative prime minister, unless there's some Quebec politics there that I don't understand, but it just seemed like kind of counter to what his message has been all campaign.
I remember when you interviewed Brian Mulroney at Farm Tech, I remember some of the people commenting, not a real conservative. Like,
yeah, exactly.
And I was maybe a little bit, I was a bit naive about it. Like I sort of had to remind myself and go and, sort of do a bit of back reading to remind myself about kind of what transpired. But that definitely was the feeling of
well, and that's what led to the creation of the Reform. That led to the Reform Party.
Yeah.
And the Conservatives being on the outs for a long time. So
they never rolled out Harper, right? They never rolled out Harper at all.
Not that I saw, no.
Not that I saw either. Yeah. It was interesting. I just finished a book about, on this note about rolling out Brian Mulroney the last week of the campaign. I just finished a book on Herbert Walker Bush, so Bush 41. And they talked about when in the Republican convention, that his son, George W. 43, when he was going to take the nomination, they purposely did not have Bush 41 talk because they wanted to create separation between the two of them. And sort of they want, for the very reasons you just talked about, they didn't want people to be looking backwards. And so if I remember correctly, a part of the deal was that Bush 41 couldn't talk, but then neither could Gerald Ford. They recognized them at the convention, but they were sort of like they didn't make a big deal about it. So yeah, these things are important as you try to create brand and image and things like that. But, Trudeau rolled out Jean Chrétien at that
Yeah.
event about a week ago, where people were criticizing them for were they or were they not following COVID restrictions. So it's interesting who gets rolled out and who doesn't.
And I think just liberal ideology, it works better because the liberals are that middle party that can go left or go right, and I think, and they kind of have a win at all costs mentality. Whatever it takes to win, that's what our policy is. So that's something where I think the liberals have an easier time at maintaining that tent, because that's part of the definition of being a member in the Liberal Party or a Liberal supporter. So yeah, it's confusing why we saw at the premier level, where was Doug Ford this election? That's another example of where there wasn't. Aaron O'Toole obviously didn't want Doug Ford's baggage influencing support for him in Ontario. So I'm pretty sure Ford, there must have been some sort of at least handshake agreement that maybe stay out of this. So you can sit on the sidelines for this one, because we saw Kenny inevitably, or at least that's what it looks like, get involved with his announcement last week. But in general, the Conservative premiers were not super involved in O'Toole's campaign, and that's kind of along the same lines as bringing forward some of these other past prime ministers. Don't bring somebody into the campaign that has a ton of baggage.
Right, but after someone's been in politics for a long time, who doesn't have baggage?
Exactly, but if you want to get off to a fresh start and have people reconsider you that have been turned off by the past of your party, why bring forward the players that were part of turning those people off?
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah, that's true. That is true.
To me, there
The
might be an ego thing there too, where it's, look, so and so is supporting me, and I think that
Yeah.
plays into some of these leadership
If you want me to
situations.
fundraise for the party in the future, you better have me at an event so I can,
Yeah.
yeah, stuff like that.
Well, and from O'Toole's perspective, I don't know. I think this is one of the things that people maybe have picked up on him too, where there seems to be something about him that he likes. He doesn't mind having the spotlight on him, and how he goes for runs, and how he I don't know, like how his whole fighter pilot navigator shtick. I there's and obviously that's the type of politicians that get into leadership races. There is some ego involved usually. So, but I think having Mulrooney, hey, Mulrooney votes for me, like
Yeah.
that's something that personally O'Toole probably sees as something that he feels good about.
Do you think that O'Toole could play up his military background more? Like he really, it's clearly a part of his brand, but I wouldn't say that he plays that card excessively.
No, but
Could he
I
play it
don't know.
more?
Well, and it makes me wonder whether he is already maximizing it out, maximizing. I don't know enough about his military background, and people in the military might call him out if he played it too much. I'm not sure. He did have support from Mark Norman and Rick Hillier and some of the prestigious leaders of Canada's military over the last decade. So
Yeah.
he did appear to have that going for him.
It would appear, and probably somebody has some data on this, but it appears that the significance of that military background plays less in Canadian politics versus American politics.
Oh, for sure it would. That's a cultural.
Yeah,
I'd say that's a cultural difference.
that is one of the differences. Yeah. Okay.
So
That makes sense.
Elections Canada now has the popular vote at just 36.5 for the Liberals to 33 for the Conservatives. So it's getting tighter, even though the seat count isn't getting tighter. So it goes to show again how efficient that liberal vote is compared to the Conservative vote.
Is there going to be? Well, we had Trudeau last week sort of launched the election election reform grenade into this campaign, saying if he's elected, he might look into it.
Yeah.
Like what would be there is nowhere near enough political will for that in my
Well,
opinion.
that was one of his main campaign that was one of his planks back in 2015, right? That's one of those that's already sitting on the heap of discarded ambitious ideas, I think. So yeah, to say he'll look at it, that's easy to say.
Brian brings up, I saw that on the screen too. PPC popular vote is at 5%. So obviously, still a lot of those ridings where he would have a lot of, if he's going to get to his, polling number of that 8%, 9%, he's going to need some Western Canadian votes that are just starting to come in.
Yeah, and this is another example where popular vote doesn't lead to seats in the House of Commons.
Yeah, he has also lost his seat.
They've already declared it?
Yeah, Richard Lahou has won that seat. So Bernier will not have a seat in the next government. So
status quo there then.
Yeah. John Barlow, who, he
not close.
That was not close. He won by 6,000 votes. I think they just started counting. So John Barlow, who always has no problem coming on and participating in some of our stuff, always appreciate that. He has easily won the riding of Foothills. Chris Workington also has won his seat for the Conservatives. That one's not called. Shannon Stubbs, Conservative out of Lakeland, has won her riding. She was the incumbent. The PPC was in second there. Rachel Harder here in Lethbridge has been declared the winner. NDP was second. Liberals third. Glenn Motts, who is in Medicine Hat, Karsten Warner, he has won quite easily. NDP is the second. PPC the third, not even a Liberal candidate. Yeah, I think it's interesting to see how some of that, like this, who got second, who got third, and you kind of, in some cases, they're a distant. Some of these Conservative races out west are not, obviously not even close, at all. But it is interesting. Liberals are up to 150, leading or one seat. So.
Oh yeah. Yeah, it'll. To me, this is looking more and more like more status quo.
CTV is saying that the maximum they believe the Liberals can get is 159.
Okay, so minority it is then.
Yeah, the minimum is 144, maximum 159. Conservatives 117 to 130. Greens are 0 to 2. Bloc is 26 to 33. NDP will be 27 to 37.
So what was the Liberal number? What was the
144 to 159.
So they won 157 in 2019. So they are there, and that was down already 20 seats from the election before. So Trudeau, I'm curious what. Yeah, this is not a win for the Liberals, I would say.
No,
certainly not what they were hoping, what they were seeing as was supposed to be a win back in summer when they were planning for this election.
I get back to my question earlier.
It is a minority win. It is an actual win, but it's not a perception win, I would say.
Okay, it's sort of like football. Okay, so in college football, how you win is sometimes just as important as the fact that you won, right? So, and I know not everybody's in college football, but I'll give you an example. Florida lost to Alabama on Saturday. It was a close game. To them, that is a victory. Okay? For Alabama, who actually won the game, depending on how Florida does the rest of the year, this may be be a bit of a negative, even though they won the game. And so, part of it's how it's positioned. So you'll have a lot of spinsters and lobbyists on TV the next 2, 3, 4 days, really trying to tell everybody how their party really did win. But I think the party that has the most explaining to do is the Liberal Party. They're the
Yeah.
ones that David Coletto said if the Liberals get less seats, Mr. Trudeau's in the hot seat. If they win 2 more seats, is that good enough, or is there going to be a lot of questions on what the heck was the point of this 5-week excursion into an election?
What was the range they had for Conservative seat count potential?
What did I tell you?
Sorry.
117
Okay.
to 130.
Okay. So it could potentially be. So they had 121 seats under Scheer's leadership in 2019. So
Okay.
there's still potential to gain some seats there for O'Toole, I guess.
Yeah. The Greens were 0 to 2. PPC was none. And the NDP I have in my head was 27. If my memory serves
Okay.
me correct. So once again, not much changes in the fact that Liberals will lean on Jagmeet Singh and the NDP to pass legislation.
Yeah. Status quo in seat counts.
Yep. Brian says here, Trudeau will take this as a clear win. The Canadians want more of the same. Question mark. Well, I think
Yeah.
it depends on how you spin it, Brian. In some ways, it's hard to take it anything but more of the same. Have Canadians clearly spoken that they believe in what has happened over the last couple of years and through the pandemic? That probably depends on your party affiliation. That's I don't know if there's a real clear message there, but if I was a liberal lobbyist, I would probably say that Canadians have spoken. Like you spin it the way you spin it. So, but
Just like they did last election when they said no taxes being raised, and then they felt they had a mandate to raise the carbon tax to $170.
well, and
Right?
here's the other side of all this, Kelvin, too, is that as much as Canadians didn't enjoy this process the last 5 weeks, the Conservative Party knows, the NDP knows, Canadians don't want to do this again in a year. Like, what are we, Israel? Like the thing is that like the chances that there's a vote to where the government falls, unless it's something of great significance. I don't know, based on some of the controversies that have followed this current government, I'm not sure what that would be, but they're not going to want to have an election again. One, can the NDP is an example. Can they afford it? So I would expect this minority government would probably hang around a lot longer than the last one did.
Yeah, I think that's fair. And then you look at the Conservative Party, and does Aaron O'Toole stay on as leader during that time then?
Brian points out a very, very good clarification here. Kelvin, that wasn't a tax; it was a price on pollution. Get it right.
Oh, yes. Thanks. That's a good correction.
Oh, Voth, I'm so glad you're here. This is good. He's always correcting me, so I'm glad that you're correcting him. There's a good little triangle we have going. So you think if they are able to capture that 117 to 130, my opinion would be O'Toole safe. What do you think?
I think so too, at least for the time being. Yeah, and that will. I think that'll actually be easier for O'Toole to keep the party together than if he had to form government and try to follow through on all the promises that have been made. But yeah, you're like you said before, there isn't a clear challenger right now or a clear movement to replace O'Toole. A lot of those people have voted for a different party, in fact.
Although Pierre Poilievre has had some very but Freeland has too, put out some like tweets where they're almost running for the leadership. Like,
Yeah,
there's been some mainstream pundits. Matt Gurney's one of them, and has sort of pointed out a couple times on Twitter, like, what is this tweet from Pierre? It's
yeah,
very like, are you seeking the leadership? Like, it's very odd.
yeah. It's completely promoting Pierre Poilievre and doesn't even mention the Conservative Party or Aaron O'Toole in it. So, whereas other candidates traditionally, you talk about what your leader is going to do, Polyev promotes himself in his. So yeah, it could be definitely framed that way, as if he's positioning himself. And I I'm not sure what the race is like in Carleton either. If he's in a fight, I should look up
Well, I
what
have that
the
result. I'm like one step
you
ahead
do.
of you here.
Okay.
I'm the John King of Canada here. Pierre Poilievre has a 48.4%
Yeah.
of the vote, whereas Mr. Roy, the Liberal candidate, has 32.4. So that's 50 of 228. So things are looking good for Mr. Poilievre in Carleton, which is in Ottawa. So
Yeah, one of the only conservative ridings, I believe. I think the rest are liberal right there.
yeah.
Could
But
Ambrose come back as party leader at this point? I think that is a possibility. There's no rules against her coming back now. There were rules that she couldn't run in the leadership race when she was interim leader, but now I don't think there would be any restrictions on her entering.
right. Yeah, I think time has lapsed now. But once again, so it's pretty well known. The reason that she had no interest was the how vile and terrible and vicious social media was towards politicians. Not just her, but just in general. That was one of the reasons that she wanted no part of it. So that situation has not got any better.
Yeah.
So and I there was stories out there that her husband had a really hard time with it. Like it would like it. Well, I think anybody you have to like shut yourself off to some of that. It would be very very difficult. I don't care what you say. Like the thickness of the skin and things that are required to do that job are. You got a lot of people sending you some pretty nasty stuff on a daily basis. And if that was what turned her off, then I don't see that changing.
That hasn't changed, no.
As good as she
And
would
that
be.
goes, and that's part of this whole discussion about how do we get high performing people and winners into politics. That's we need to change the culture around it in that sense, right?
So how do we do that? Because this is one of my. You're going to get me ranting, but how do we do that? How do we improve the crop that we're attracting to Ottawa?
Well, I know people don't like it when politicians get raises, but if you're going to want people to quit their job as CEO of a company, if people with good leadership skills have been recognized as having those leadership skills in private industry, they're usually well compensated in private industry. And if we want those people to get into politics, I think that has to be part of the conversation. You're not going to get unless they're doing it out of charity and that they have a cause they want to get into, which is a noble reason for getting into politics as well. It's hard to you're collecting. I know MPs are well compensated compared to many Canadians, and so maybe it isn't that black and white, but I think you have to be able to attract people that are well compensated in their current occupations. You have to be able to get them out of there if you want them to if we want that leadership, those tools deployed in the government. Or what do you think about that?
Yeah, very fair. Yeah, that's definitely. I think that's very fair, actually.
I'm not saying being a CEO and a politician are the same thing either.
No, it's not. But I think one of the things that is not helping is how centrally controlled decision making is. So that's so now we have a situation where even if I'm a cabinet minister, I may not have any sort of pull. Never mind a backbencher. Like even a cabinet minister, some are out of the loop. And that's why we have situations like we had with finance minister who stepped down.
Morneau, Bill Morneau.
Bill Morneau, thank you. It was basically finance minister or bust, right? So I think that's an issue that sort of has to be sorted out. Twitter and social media is not helping. You just really have to ask, why would you want to put your family through that? Seriously, I love talking about this stuff. I find it incredibly intriguing. I love to read books about politics. I can't think of a job that is more thankless. No matter what party. Like the pay ain't great. You're away from your family all the time, and everybody wants to drag you through the mud and find out something you tweeted when you were 14 years old. Like
Yeah.
it is not a fun. It is a real well, and that's why you have to have like a mindset of like there's that's why we see people going for some of the wrong reasons. Not everybody, but there are people that go for the wrong reasons because there's narcissism involved and there's ego and there's it's I don't know why people would want to do it. I really it is I really do question it because I'm not sure I would want to put my family through it.
Yeah. And to take that clearly we need a better sales pitch than that, Shaun. I think to build on that, kudos to everybody that does have their name on a ballot, whatever
Oh
party it is
God,
today. Like
no kidding.
like yeah, I would just say hats off to everybody who is involved and is taking that chance and sacrificing their life in many ways
It especially the
to the
ones that have no chance of winning. That's
yeah.
like there's that too. Like there's the ones that have ambition and hey, you know what, if I go to Ottawa, I'm going to change things. I'm going to everyone goes with the best intentions. And so they have a chance of winning in some of these close races. But there's a lot of candidates you're going to see on the screen tonight that get like 4% of the vote, 5% of
Yeah.
the vote. They're just trying to do what they believe in. And you know what?
They're going
Hats
back
off
to
to
work
those people too.
cutting hair or taking off the rest of the canola tomorrow kind of thing. It's
Right, right. Now,
it's
sorry, go
oh,
ahead.
go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, I know the parties there are a lot of candidates that are just token fillers that don't even show up in the riding other than to put up a couple signs kind of thing. That I'm not I understand, like, to me that's just more the partisan side of things, but I admire the people who run and put a ton of energy into it even if they know they don't have a chance at winning.
Yeah, good point. Uh, I saw on the screen, and I'm trying to remind myself, who was Ferrari running against?
Sorry, my internet cut out there.
Who
Who's
was
who running against?
Michelle Ferrari has beat Monsef. Monsef is out,
Oh yeah. Oh
so she
really? Okay. I
lost.
knew. Yeah, Monsef's riding was one of the cabinet ministers that was on the line there. So okay,
Yeah,
she's the minister that she was responsible for all the vaccine contracts, right?
yeah. Michelle Ferrari is the conservative. She has beat the incumbent Monsef in Peterborough. So that conservatives pick up a seat there that they'll be
Yeah,
excited
that's a big
about.
one.
And Monsef was probably made a lot of controversy in that race when the comments about my brother's the Taliban.
Yeah,
That was sort of I would imagine that came up quite a bit in some of the debates that happened in that local riding. John Smith. We got scouts out. Burnaby South, Sing at 32, Liberals and Conservatives at 29. Very close. Wouldn't that be interesting? Did you freeze, Kelvin?
I might have. I'm trying to load results here and
Do we need to call Elon?
foreign interference in our election here.
Okay, I got to go back to my.
So right now, uh, they're saying versus how the seat count was before the election. The Liberals are down 2, Conservatives are up 2, and the NDP is up 6. So good
Okay,
night for the
say
NDP,
say
probably.
say that again for us.
As it stands right now, with who's leading in each race, it's Liberals down 2 seats, Conservatives up 2 seats, and NDP up 6. Oh, it just changed to NDP up 7.
That's a big win for the NDP.
I think so.
Yeah.
They were disappointing in 2019. There was a lot of people disappointed in the NDP result versus what the polls had been ahead of time. So
I'm just loading here. Well, it's not. Global has really a good riding
That's the
finder.
one I'm on right now.
It's
Yeah.
really good. It's the best so far that I've seen. Um, it's interesting. I'm looking.
Popular vote is within a half a percentage point now between liberals and conservatives. So we could see a repeat there too, where conservatives win the popular vote as those West ridings pile up.
I'm gonna because we don't have like all of the money of all the graphics and stuff. I'm just gonna use my phone. Um, how that that doesn't that look very similar to what the map looked like last time,
Yeah, are there any?
right?
Oh,
Like,
your screen faded. Your
yeah, sorry.
screen's turned
Back to, or we got to fix our
on.
graphics, right? Doesn't it? It looks so
Yeah,
similar.
yeah.
Like, and so it's a really good visual on if you want to say how divided the country is. There's definitely regional perspectives. Let's go with that. Um, yeah,
What is BC looking like? Is it orange or is it blue? There's a
it's
lot of
so
freeway races in
on the
North County. Was
interior
looking.
it's all blue. So like when you're
Okay.
like I better be careful here. There's one South Okanagan, West Kootenay is the NDP is in a very close race, but leading. Then it's like the whole interior is all blue, but then as soon as you get to the coast, that's where it turns NDP. There looks to be one Liberal riding, West Vancouver, Sunshine Coast, Sea to Sky Country. The Liberals are off to an early lead. Patrick Wheeler is leading there, but otherwise it is kind of orange everywhere.
I wonder if that might be where the NDP are making up those seats because some of those would have been liberal in the past.
There is
John Smith says CPAC has Bernier's speech on right now.
okay. There is. Wait a minute here. Oh, there is a conservative. Conservatives are winning in a seat. I don't know if that was the case before. Conservatives are leading in a riding on the island
Oh,
in Nanaimo. Tamara Cronus is in the lead there. Wasn't that interesting? And there's of course there's a green but there is a lot of orange. There is a Liberal leading in Victoria, Nikki MacDonald. So yeah, that you're probably right. That's where the NDP is probably gaining is out in BC. Well, I'll go back to my fancy graphic.
that riding that has Tamara Cronus in the lead, Shaun, was a green riding. That was Paul Manley's,
Okay, there you go.
and he's running again. So
You can
potentially,
see the outline of Alberta, and then the interior of BC, and then how it just goes kind of all orange.
so from the Greater Vancouver area, well, there's a little bit of orange in the south there, but that's the whole prairie region
Yeah,
right into Vancouver through the Rockies is largely blue there.
yep. It's yeah. So it really does show the how regionally we're not on the same page. Like it's yeah. You look, it's Winnipeg. There's obviously some Liberal there, some red, but then all of southern Manitoba is blue, and then it goes NDP in northern Manitoba. So which was I'm assuming the case previously.
Yeah, Nikki Ashton.
Yes, Churchill in the Churchill riding. So yeah, I guess this is the election where we really didn't figure anything out. Like really, like I just get back to the how what is under what scenario does this map change, right? So, and I don't mean to use all U.S. examples, but it's the same issue where you have the coasts are Democrat, the interior is Republican. Ours is a little more sort of more complicated than that. There's a lot. One, there's more colors, but have things changed that much since how does this map change? That's the that's really the kind of thing I don't really have sort of figured out. Is we sure the hell didn't do it this election. So what would the issues need to be? Who would the people need to be to sort of change this gridlock that we're currently in politically? Obviously, the NDP has made some advances, but for the most part, the net works out to very similar for the rest of the parties. And so here we are.
Yeah, kind of locked in for the last however many years, other than those ridings in Ontario and Quebec that have swung. We saw the orange wave and the rebound of the Liberals in 2015. But yeah, you're right. It's at the fringes, and certainly here in the prairies where you and I are, it feels it feels a lot. Like it'd be interesting to live in a riding where there is a real race and where there are potentially even a three-way race, where your vote where it isn't just the same old, where you feel like things could change the direction of the country.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to hear some of like the people like the Daryl Brickers of the world and David Coletto's, Nick Nanos's that break down the suburban votes. That's always interesting. How did suburbia vote? That's something I'm interested in hearing more of a breakdown on. Brian points out, it's been said before, it's not an east or west divide as much as a rural urban through most of Canada, and that is, I think that's definitely the truth. For the most part, although even in some of those cities, it becomes, it's a divide between left and more left. But obviously, when you compare just in a left-right comparison, it is very much rural versus urban, and that's one thing in some of my speeches I've had to explain to people in Western Canada is that Southwestern Ontario is just as conservative as you. You may think that everybody from the east votes red, but check out the map on Southwestern Ontario. Going John King again, there's Southwestern Ontario. It's pretty blue.
Yeah.
Right. So once again, not much of a change from the last election.
Popular vote is in favor of the Conservatives now. 33.8% Conservative, 33.4% Liberals. So again, another major characteristic that's the same with this election as in 2019.
So as we work our way west, the popular vote continues to swing more towards.
Oh yeah, it piles up quickly when you have 50, 60% of the riding votes, as opposed to 33 or 35 in the eastern ridings that are closer.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, and Brian just mentioned the cost of the elections. I think that is, and then you have to add in the cost of whichever party is in power, how much they're spending versus what the alternative would have spent too. That's where an even bigger number comes into play probably. Although the Conservative platform wasn't super fiscally conservative this time around either.
No, with there's no fiscal hawks. What are you talking about? That's an endangered species. We have a birds of prey center here in Cold, Alberta, like 15 minutes out of the town. There's like the fiscal hawks.
You can't even find a fiscal hawk there.
Yeah, there's maybe one or two of them. They've been put out to. They're more in like a museum now. Is that the way the Conservative like? That's one thing I wonder. If it's 4 or whatever years from now that we have an election, is that a differentiating factor for the Conservatives next time around? Is because there's a lot of time between now and then, but is it more of a fiscal conservative message that we hear next time around to differentiate themselves from the Liberals?
I think when this election result gets analyzed, I think that could potentially be something that they realize they should have gone into a little deeper. The whole issue of inflation, and we've talked about rising food prices, and everything is more expensive than it was a year ago or 2 years ago. And I think every Canadian is feeling the impact of that. So I think they could have used that already in this playbook for this election to talk about affordability and inflation. The challenge then is making that link between government spending and inflation, because certainly through COVID with the CERB program and all the other government spending programs, there doesn't seem to have been an appetite for reducing spending, certainly. But I think if you'd have to do a convincing job of explaining the economics of how monetary policy, which Justin Trudeau said he doesn't, what was his quote? I forget.
He doesn't pay
Somebody asked
attention to it or
policy,
something
yeah.
like it was like I
But
don't know what it was.
you'd have to have enough voters understand the impact of monetary policy on economics and on their cost of living, and to make that link. But I do think that is something that a lot of Canadians already do understand, and maybe they would vote for that. But yeah, right now we're in such a short-term thinking. We like to think about what's good for me now, not necessarily what's good for my kids and what's good for our country 20, 30, 50 years down the road. So
I think
and
people are
that seems
thinking
to be
short.
worldwide. Not
Yeah,
just
it very well. We had that. I forget what meeting it was, but we had the chief economist from Rabobank,
Rabobank, yeah.
and that's one thing that he said. Like, this is a global phenomenon. Is that if you are if you are pushing fiscal responsibility right now, you're like a political sitting duck. There's no appetite in many of these global elections that have happened as of late, where like people just don't want to hear about it.
But if we see inflation and the link is made to it, is there going to be some pushback? I don't know. I guess the link isn't clear enough with all the supply chain issues, and there's so many different reasons being given for why prices are increasing these days. So maybe it's too difficult for a politician to, like, I know explaining is losing in politics. I think that's a quote that some people say. So
Yeah.
you don't want to you want to have a simple message. So maybe that is too complicated. I don't know.
Yeah, you also got people that are interested in listening. Like,
yes,
everything. Can you do it in a TikTok video? Like, like that. That's what some of the stuff's been resorted to. Yeah, and I agree, Brian, that sticking heads in the sand isn't a great approach to dealing with inflation and fiscal policy either. It's I think Kelvin brings up a good point that it's going to take. Like most things, it's going to take a situation where people really feel it impacts them personally before it becomes something that resonates with them and becomes something that they would vote about, right? It's why foreign affairs rarely impacts elections, because it's really hard for foreign affairs issues, something happening all the way across the world. It's hard to draw that back to impacting your business. Or your family household, right? Unless you're, in a military situation, maybe it changes your vote because you lost a family member in a some sort of a battle where there was military was deployed. But yeah, we're to a point where people vote based on what impacts them.
Yeah,
and it seems, there
but eventually it catches up.
It does, and it will, but it hasn't yet. Maybe the next one.
Yeah.
Oh, and Brian's right. Interest rates would do it.
Checking some tweets here, and it looks like there's already some battle in the Conservative Party over whether this is categorized as a win or not. Some of Aaron O'Toole's camp saying that holding Trudeau to a minority is a win, and other Conservatives saying that doesn't count as a win. You lost the election, that's not a win. So
I guess what was your expectation? Did you like there was about a 7-day period, I think you talked about this earlier. There was a 7-day period where it seemed like they could win. Like there was it was a possibility. That sort of lost steam. I think if they did take a minority, I think it would be like, oh my goodness, like that would be beyond anybody's expectations based on how they started. So they kind of finished. Did they not just sort of finish how everybody expected them to finish from the very beginning? Like there was a moment of hope where they had like a race strategy where, maybe Trudeau would run out of fuel. Now I'm using Formula One comparisons. Like there was at some point where, Trudeau was going to run out of fuel and wouldn't be able to complete the race. His tires were shot and they were going to be able to finish and take the victory. But Trudeau just seemed to have more fuel than people thought a week ago. And so I just have a hard time saying it's a disappointment. I think it's what sort of was inevitable. Like, it's sort of what we predicted. Like, not, and when I say we, I mean like just in general.
Yeah, and I guess we should give some credit maybe to the pollsters too, for it looks like we're within the range of what pollsters were expected. We like to give them a hard time when things go unexpected, but that's the thing. This all looks pretty status quo. Now Conservatives are up to a full percentage point ahead in the popular vote. Still not in government though.
Yeah, and it's interesting. In the U.S., if they voted on popular vote, the Democrats would easily win. It's the
the system benefits the Republicans.
Yeah.
In terms of vote efficiency, here our system, the Liberal Party seems to have the best vote efficiency with good comment by John.
I agree, John. If you ever want to start like an F1 podcast or college football, I'm all in. But yeah, yeah. Okay, I think we better wrap up.
Yeah, the Beaverton. So
good. This is exactly what we should finish.
Did you see it?
No, but what does it say?
CBC and CTV declare that you can go to bed.
That's pretty. Oh, that's pretty much it. Well, you know what? For everybody that took some time out of their night to spend it with us here at Real Agriculture with Kelvin and I, we really, really do appreciate it. This is a lot of fun to kind of do something live like this and just sort of break it down, and people participated with comments and questions. We really do appreciate it. We're going to do more RealAg Politics. I will tell you this. They will not all be 3 hours and 15 minutes. But tonight was a bit of a special night, and we really appreciate everybody joining us tonight and spending it with us. And we're wrapping this up again. This is the third time I've tried to wrap it.
Ask a question, Brian. We'll keep going.
Yeah, my wife's called me like 3 times. But I know.
I told my wife I told Kayla that it would take 45 minutes to an hour. The kids are long asleep now.
Good stuff. Well, hey, Kelvin, thanks a lot. This has been a lot of fun, bud.
Likewise, yes. Thanks everybody else for participating and asking questions. That's what makes this so much fun too.
Well, Jeff Nielsen says he's still combining. He said it was great.
Yes,
so
good.
And
that's good. It means he's going. Well, I guess it's Alberta time. I was going to say it means he's going late. It's productive night.
John Smith says this is much better than listening to mainstream media. Hey, John, thanks a lot. Appreciate that. Brian, appreciate you tuning in and participating as well. So, hey, on the behalf of everybody at Real Agriculture, thanks a lot, everybody. And we will have more coverage of the election tomorrow. David Coletto of Abacus Data will be on Real Ag Radio. And, of course, make sure you tune into Friday's show on Real Ag Radio, where Kelvin and Lindsay and I and guests will break down this and put a bit more of an ag spin on it as well. Probably some predictions on who the next ag minister will be. Will Marie-Claude hold her spot, or is there an up-and-comer looking for that position? Only time will tell, but we'll have some thoughts on Friday's show for sure for you. Hey, everybody, thanks a lot for getting real and getting connected with Real Ag Politics. See you later. Cheers, everybody.